Teng Mo owns a small adult novelty shop. One of his regular customers is a cool, aloof young man who repeatedly comes in to buy Viagra, gradually catching Teng Mo's attention. A chance encounter, and an unexpected mix-up involving something far more potent than the medication the young man intended to buy, draws the two into a passionate, complicated relationship. The story centers on a one-on-one romance between the mature shop owner and a young wolf dog-type bar singer, blending explicit intimacy with genuine emotional development. Alongside its steamy romance, it explores hurt/comfort dynamics, melodrama, darker emotional themes, and twists of fate as the two men navigate desire, vulnerability, and healing. Chapter 1. A Face Gifted by the Heavens. A cigarette hung from Teng Mo's lips as he was in the middle of a match, scrambling to reach the safe zone. Hearing someone speak, he glanced up at the newcomer and hurriedly replied, "Just a second. Hang on, give me a minute." Wu Shi Xian stood in front of the glass display counter, his expression cool and silent. He simply tapped his fingers lightly against the glass, looking faintly impatient. After finally making it into the safe zone and finding a place to hide, Teng Mo took off his headset, stood up, and offered an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. The 5-pill pack or the 10-pill pack?" "5 pills." Wu Shi Xian took out the money, his face expressionless. "All right, that's 450. As Teng Mo slid open the small glass cabinet to retrieve the medicine, he stole another glance at the man out of the corner of his eye. This was the 4th time the man had come in to buy Viagra this month. Teng Mo had remembered him from the very first visit because of his blue lips. His long hair was dyed a grayish blue, with the upper half tied into a high ponytail, making him look like a blue peacock. Blue was the coolest of cool colors, often associated with serenity and purity. Yet on this man, blue lips gave him an air of dangerous, unconventional beauty. Teng Mo usually wasn't fond of men who wore heavy makeup, but somehow, this man's appearance wasn't unpleasant at all. Instead, it carried a fierce, untamed elegance. It was probably because of his exceptional bone structure. Although he had long, narrow phoenix eyes and a pointed chin, he didn't look feminine. On the contrary, his high forehead, pronounced brow ridge, and sharp jawline gave his face striking definition, refined without seeming delicate, masculine without appearing rough. Teng Mo couldn't help thinking that the man had every right to dress as flamboyantly as he liked. His face was truly a gift from the heavens. He always showed up after midnight, carrying with him the decadent atmosphere of the nightlife, a scent of alcohol, cigarettes, and mixed fragrances. Teng Mo guessed he performed somewhere along the nearby bar street, since he sometimes carried a guitar case on his back. That was one of the reasons Teng Mo had opened his shop here. People leaving the bars often needed adult products. Wu Shi Xian placed the money on the counter. It was a messy pile of bills, 2 100 yuan notes, with the rest made up of crumpled 10s and 20s. Without bothering to count them, Teng Mo picked up the box of pills and held it out first. Wu Shi Xian reached for it. Just as his fingers were about to touch the box, Teng Mo suddenly lifted his hand. Wu Shi Xian grabbed nothing but air. He looked up, raising his brows, a trace of irritation flashing across his eyes. Teng Mo merely smiled. Whatever the reason, Teng Mo suddenly found himself curious about this aggressive, blue-lipped peacock. Although he generally wasn't interested in men, a beautiful face was a beautiful face, regardless of gender. Chapter 2. "Hey, handsome, are you here alone?" It was past 10 o'clock the following evening, prime time for people looking to have some fun. Teng Mo closed up his shop and strolled leisurely toward the nearby bar street, wandering from one venue to the next. He didn't have to search long to find the blue peacock. The man was impossible to miss, standing on stage and clearly visible through the bar's street-facing window. The bar was called Blue Moon, and Teng Mo suddenly understood why the man wore blue lipstick. As he pulled open the door, he walked straight into the song's explosive finale. The deafening wall of sound nearly knocked him right back outside. "Do young people these days all have hearing problems?" Teng Mo muttered, clutching his chest as he made his way to a seat at the bar with a clear view of the stage. "What can I get you, sir?" the bartender asked with a welcoming smile. Teng Mo briefly considered ordering a glass of milk, but worried he might get thrown out if he did. Instead, he settled on a Long Island iced tea. He had barely taken 2 sips when a bright, cheerful voice sounded beside him. "I'll have a Long Island iced tea too." Turning his head, Teng Mo saw a young woman with thick, wavy hair and a sweet, pretty face. Noticing his gaze, she looked back at him with wide, round eyes. "Hey, handsome, are you here alone?" A faint smile curved Teng Mo's lips. His slightly overgrown bangs fell across his eyes, lending him a touch of melancholy. "I'm not really a young guy anymore," he said with a chuckle. "More like an older brother." The young woman narrowed her eyes as she studied him. Teng Mo wasn't the sort of man who stunned people at first glance, but the longer one looked, the more attractive he became. His features were well-proportioned, his face slender yet gentle. His deep-set eyes carried a warm, easygoing softness that made him seem kind and trustworthy. He was the sort of handsome man who felt approachable rather than intimidating. "You're funny. You're obviously still so young, and really handsome too." She flipped her hair back and rested her chin on one hand, smiling at him. Just as Teng Mo was about to reply, the music started again. The band had finished their short break and launched into the next song. An explosive rhythm burst forth as soaring guitar riffs intertwined with pounding drums, instantly capturing Teng Mo's full attention. The Blue Peacock stood at center stage, one hand steadying his guitar while the other held the microphone near his lips. His expression remained cool and distant. Teng Mo was slightly surprised to discover that he was also the lead vocalist. Then the man sang his first line. Goosebumps instantly spread across Teng Mo's arms. Without sounding like he was forcing his voice at all, he sang with incredible richness and power. There was something almost magical about it, as though every note pierced straight through to the listener's soul. "Baby, I hear hell calling my name. Baby, I hear hell calling out to me. Out in the desert, I pray for rain. In this barren desert, I pray for rain. I need love. Baby, I need love. I need love. Baby, I need your burning love. Take me down, everybody down. Let me sink. Let everyone sink. Take me down, down to the bottom. Let me fall. Let me descend into the bottomless abyss. Take me down, everybody down. Let me be corrupted. Let everyone be corrupted. Take me down, down to the bottom. Let me fall. Let me plunge into the devil's lair." It was electrifying. Teng Mo was no stranger to grand stages or live concerts. Yet he had never imagined that a singer in a small neighborhood bar could possess such overwhelming charisma. The man on stage radiated a blazing, almost scorching energy that sent adrenaline surging through Teng Mo's body, making even his fingertips tremble with excitement. At that moment, he was the brightest star on the stage. Every movement seemed to shine with its own light, making people forget time, space, and even where they had come from or where they were headed. "Hey, handsome." A hand with burgundy-painted nails waved in front of Teng Mo's face, snapping him out of his trance. "Huh, my friends and I are sitting over there." The curly-haired girl pointed toward a booth. "Would you like to come join us for a while?" "I'll pass." Teng Mo smiled apologetically. "I'm waiting for someone." "I see, all right." She looked a little disappointed before asking. "Then, how about we exchange WeChat contacts?" As a gentleman, how could he refuse such a request from a beautiful woman? Teng Mo took out his phone and let her scan his QR code. After watching her walk away, he slipped his phone back into his pocket and promptly forgot all about it. Teng Mo stayed at the bar for 2 hours that night, listening to Blue Peacock perform 8 songs. He also learned that the singer's name was Wu Shi Xian. Why do the 50 strings of the brocade zither sound without reason? Every string and every bridge awakens memories of years gone by. An interesting name. Chapter 3. Stirring up trouble. For the past few days, Teng Mo hadn't been paying much attention to his business. As soon as the clock struck 9, he'd close up shop and head to Blue Moon to hang out. Every now and then, young women would try to strike up a conversation with him. After all, Teng Mo was tall and lean, dressed with impeccable taste, and carried himself with quiet refinement. He was the kind of man who naturally stood out in a crowd. Yet not a single woman ever managed to stay seated beside him for more than 10 minutes. He didn't flirt, he didn't do drugs, and he didn't dance. He simply ordered a drink, sat at the bar, and watched the person performing in the center of the stage. That person was undeniably beautiful. Beautiful in a cold, distant sort of way. But he was a male escort, wasn't he? Otherwise, why would someone who looked so proud and unapproachable drink whenever a customer bought him around? Why would someone who appeared so aloof agree to sit with customers as soon as money was involved, remaining expressionless even when they groped his ass? He must really need the money. There are countless reasons people need money. Without knowing someone's circumstances, no one has the right to judge. Still, if he really was an escort, then the Viagra made perfect sense. After all, in that line of work, you never knew what kind of clients you might encounter. Performance problems were understandable, and a little pharmaceutical assistance was only natural. Making a living wasn't easy for anyone these days. You couldn't earn much money just by singing, especially not the kind of dark rock Wu Shi Xian performed. It was powerful and exciting the first time you heard it, but listening to songs filled with death, bloodshed, and despair every single day was exhausting. People came to bars to relax and have fun, not to spend the evening drowning in negativity. Fortunately, Wu Shi Xian mostly sang in English. Very few people understood the lyrics, let alone cared about the themes of decay and hopelessness hidden inside them. Most customers were busy drinking, boasting, flirting, or looking for a hookup. To them, he was little more than background music, so they couldn't care less about what he was actually singing. Teng Mo, however, was different. He came to listen to the music, and with his excellent English, hearing the singer endlessly howl about abysses, ashes, suffering, and destruction quickly became irritating. To him, it all sounded like the melodramatic angst of a rebellious teenager. Nothing but overdramatic whining. Young man, carrying that much resentment all the time isn't healthy. On a whim, Teng Mo asked the bartender, "Can I request a song here?" He pointed toward Wu Shi Xian. "I picked the song, and he sings it." "Sure," the bartender replied while shaking a cocktail. He glanced toward the stage before adding, 300 yuan per request. 300 yuan wasn't exactly cheap. Teng Mo did the math. He could afford it. He waved over a waiter and submitted his request. Wu Shi Xian accepted the folded note from the waiter. The moment he unfolded it and read the song title, his face darkened. Teng Mo had requested Pink Memories. It was the kind of song that could make a tough guy cry. Standing on stage, Wu Shi Xian's expression visibly changed. At the bar, Teng Mo grinned from ear to ear. This was just too entertaining. That stubborn, indignant expression. Teng Mo was certain Wu Shi Xian would sing it. After all, there was real cash folded inside the note, crisp banknotes. A male escort wouldn't refuse Chairman Mao. Sure enough, Wu Shi Xian kept a stony face as he exchanged a few words with the keyboardist and guitarist behind him. The burly musicians adjusted their instruments, and before long, a cheerful, upbeat melody filled the bar. What Teng Mo couldn't understand was how Wu Shi Xian managed it. The lyrics were full of sunshine. Summer quietly slips away, leaving behind little secrets. A romantic summer, and a romantic you. Give me a pink memory. Every line overflowed with youthful sweetness. Yet somehow, Wu Shi Xian sang the adorable little love song as though it were the tragic lament of someone enduring unbearable suffering. As though every lyric carried the weight of life and death. He was truly devoted to his own brand of despair. Still, Teng Mo wasn't discouraged. It was only 300 yuan. Who couldn't afford to request a song these days? So the next day, he requested Little Apple. On the third day, he requested Waiting 1,000 Years. Then, on the fourth day, Wu Shi Xian received another note. The title read, Love Trade. The moment Wu Shi Xian saw it, the corner of his eye twitched. He said something quietly to the waiter delivering the note, and the waiter pointed toward the bar. Following the direction of the gesture, Wu Shi Xian looked over. Teng Mo immediately sat up straight, flashed an innocent smile, and gave him an elegant wave. The next thing he saw was the blue peacock storming straight toward him. Are you doing this on purpose? Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth as he slammed the request slip onto the bar. No. Teng Mo replied with an innocent expression. I only requested popular songs. They're all songs everyone knows. But what? I paid for the requests. I didn't ask you to sing them for free. Teng Mo pouted, looking thoroughly wronged. If I'm spending money, of course I'm going to choose songs I like. You can't expect me to pay and then pick songs you like instead, can you? Wu Shi Xian was so furious at the twisted logic that he couldn't find the words to argue. Yet Teng Mo continued pressing him. So, doesn't that make perfect sense? Sense my ass. Wu Shi Xian couldn't be bothered wasting another word. He threw a punch straight at Teng Mo's infuriatingly smug face. Whoa, resorting to violence already. Teng Mo tilted his head, effortlessly dodging the punch. In the same motion, he grabbed Wu Shi Xian's wrist and held it firmly. Then, with complete confidence, he began lecturing him. You just assaulted a customer in front of everyone. And not just any customer, the one paying for your song requests. Do you not want this job anymore? Wu Shi Xian yanked hard, trying to pull his hand free. It didn't move. Teng Mo looked slender enough, but his grip was astonishingly strong. Still smiling calmly, Teng Mo said, Go back on stage and finish your performance. As long as the show goes on, I won't complain to your boss. Chapter 4. Old Beast. You're dead. You betrayed my love. You forced me to leave. Love isn't something you can put up for sale. If you think you can buy it, then sell it yourself. Teng Mo shuddered from the audience. Too vicious. It had originally been such a good song, but Wu Shi Xian sang it through gritted teeth while glaring at him with murderous eyes that seemed ready to tear flesh from bone, as though they truly had some blood-soaked history together. Before long, several customers noticed something was off with the singer and began glancing toward Teng Mo. But someone who ran an adult products store had to be thick-skinned. Otherwise, he never would have stayed in business this long. So, under the curious, gossip-filled gazes of the crowd, Teng Mo calmly raised his wine glass toward Wu Shi Xian on stage in a graceful toast, looking completely open and innocent. The spectators quickly turned their attention back to the stage, while Wu Shi Xian's expression grew even darker. Thus began their little war. As though he'd discovered a new game, Teng Mo made a point of requesting songs that would disgust Wu Shi Xian every single day. The more irritating the song, the happier he was. Every time, the veins on Wu Shi Xian's forehead bulged. Wu Shi Xian's special talent was turning even the liveliest song into a funeral dirge. You disgust me? Then I'll bore you to death. A week passed. Even the bartender couldn't help shaking his head whenever Teng Mo walked in. But today, when Teng Mo pushed open the door, he was surprised to find Wu Shi Xian wasn't on stage. Instead, he was drinking again. Teng Mo took his usual seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and slowly sipped it while looking over. The blue peacock sat among 4 women with a cold expression. More than a dozen rainbow cocktails were lined up on the table, and nearly half the shot glasses were already empty. The 4 women laughed and teased one another, but Wu Shi Xian neither smiled nor spoke much. He simply drank in silence. After watching for a while, Teng Mo noticed that the 4 little sisters were actually a bit older. No amount of makeup could hide the deep freckles on their faces. Tisk, tisk. Teng Mo secretly shook his head. The little blue peacock probably wasn't going to have an easy night. Just then, Wu Shi Xian looked up and happened to meet Teng Mo's eyes. Teng Mo casually raised his glass in greeting. Unexpectedly, Wu Shi Xian stood up, said something to the people beside him, and walked straight over. Looks like trouble. He was probably here to start another fight. Teng Mo wasn't afraid in the slightest. As Wu Shi Xian approached, he smiled and asked first, What song are you requesting today? Wu Shi Xian shot him a murderous glare, but said nothing. He also didn't leave. Now that was strange. Teng Mo leaned a little closer. Something else. Wu Shi Xian immediately took half a step back. After a long pause, he awkwardly asked, When are you going back to your shop today? Teng Mo glanced toward the booth and instantly understood. The last time Wu Shi Xian had come to buy medicine had been a week ago. He had probably run out of Viagra. Without one AI to save him, surviving tonight with those 4 wolf-like, big sisters would be difficult. He might collapse halfway through. Still, with the responsibility of a professional, Teng Mo shook his head. Kid, you've been drinking. You can't take Viagra anymore. Leaning closer, he exaggerated the shape of his mouth as he whispered, It'll explode. Wu Shi Xian's ears instantly turned red. I don't need you telling me what to do. Realizing how ridiculous it had been to come ask this man for help, Wu Shi Xian angrily turned to leave. Hey, wait. Teng Mo called after him. Take this. Wu Shi Xian stopped. After hesitating for a moment, he turned around and saw a small pale yellow tablet in Teng Mo's hand. What is it? A special hangover medicine. Wu Shi Xian looked suspicious. Poison. It really is for hangovers. Teng Mo put on the most sincere expression he could manage. I just don't want customers complaining about the medicine I sell because they mess themselves up. Wu Shi Xian looked at him as though he'd been kicked in the head by a donkey before turning away again. Teng Mo added, "If you take it, I won't request songs just to annoy you for the rest of this month, or next month." "Really?" Wu Shi Xian turned back immediately, clearly tempted. "Really?" Teng Mo held out the pill. "I'm an adult. I keep my promises." Wu Shi Xian took it and turned it over in his hand. It was only a small piece cut from a larger tablet. The back was covered with foreign writing that looked like wriggling earthworms, completely unreadable. Still, in a public place like this, Teng Mo wouldn't dare poison him. If anything happened, he'd never escape responsibility. Maybe it really was hangover medicine. After all, he knew that alcohol and one AI weren't supposed to be mixed. "You said it." Wu Shi Xian asked the bartender for a glass of water, swallowed the pill in one gulp, slammed the empty glass onto the bar, then pointed at Teng Mo. "Don't bother me anymore." Teng Mo watched him return to the booth and resume sitting among the women with the same blank expression. Since Wu Shi Xian wasn't singing tonight, Teng Mo suddenly found the place rather boring. After finishing his drink, he set the empty glass down and headed home. Might as well play some games. He put on his headset, lit a cigarette, and launched PUBG. 5 matches later, he'd won 2 chicken dinners and was in an excellent mood. During the 6th match, he repeated his usual strategy. After parachuting into a small cluster of buildings and gathering supplies, he found a bush to hide in while waiting for the circle to shrink. Just as he was preparing to move, he heard gunfire ahead. Immediately changing direction, he circled around the fighting, planning to crawl into the next safe zone unnoticed. Right then, the shop's glass door swung open. Someone walked in. "We're closed today." Without even looking away from the computer, Teng Mo said, "Didn't you see the sign on the door?" Instead of stopping, the newcomer strode straight over and slammed both hands onto the glass display counter with a loud bang. The sudden noise startled Teng Mo so badly that his headset nearly fell off. Turning around, he saw the blue peacock standing there. Both hands braced against the counter. His face was bright red. His eyes looked ready to spit fire. Teng Mo pulled off his headset and hung it around his neck. Surprised, he asked, "Why aren't you with your little sisters?" "Why am I here?" Wu Shi Xian roared. "Don't you know exactly why I'm here?" "What did I do now?" Teng Mo looked completely baffled. "I didn't even request a song today. What exactly did you make me take?" Wu Shi Xian pointed at him, his finger trembling with rage. "Oh, that. The hangover. My ass." Wu Shi Xian cut him off. "You think I'm an idiot?" Teng Mo had intended to keep bluffing, but after glancing at Wu Shi Xian's neck, he noticed that even his chest beneath it had turned bright red. The medicine had clearly taken effect. There was no point pretending anymore. "Little brother, I was helping you." Teng Mo immediately adopted the tone of an experienced elder. "I already told you that one AI isn't something you should take every day, and you're definitely not supposed to mix it with alcohol. What I gave you is a brand new medicine I just got from India. Drinking won't affect its performance at all. Not only are the side effects much smaller." He wiggled his eyebrows dramatically. "It's also much stronger than one AI." Wu Shi Xian ground his teeth. "How much stronger?" Teng Mo held up 3 fingers. "If nothing unexpected happens, it'll last 3 days." Wu Shi Xian froze. "You mean, I'm going to stay like this for 3 days?" Teng Mo thought for a moment. More or less. "Fuck you." In an instant, Wu Shi Xian exploded with rage. "You old beast. I'm going to kill you." He lunged across the counter, reaching for Teng Mo's collar. At that exact moment, a loud ripping sound echoed through the shop. Both of them froze. Eyes wide, Teng Mo stared in utter disbelief at Wu Shi Xian's crotch. "No way. It was actually that hard." Wu Shi Xian hurriedly covered himself with both hands, his face burning with humiliation and fury. "Old beast, you're dead." Chapter 5. Where's the antidote? "It's not." Teng Mo fought back a laugh, trying not to make it too obvious. "Given your situation, shouldn't you be looking for one of those ladies? Why did you come to me?" Wu Shi Xian's face turned bright red. "Where's the antidote?" "There is no antidote." Teng Mo was barely managing to suppress his laughter. "This isn't some knockout drug. You just need to release the heat, and it'll pass." "Where the hell am I supposed to release the heat?" Teng Mo looked genuinely surprised, as though the answer should have been obvious. "You mean you didn't choose a single one of the 4 women who were surrounding you tonight?" "I'm only there to drink, damn it." No matter how composed Wu Shi Xian normally was, Teng Mo had pushed him to the edge. He was grinding his teeth, looking ready to explode. Teng Mo shook his head in disbelief. You took so much Viagra. Where did all that energy go? The moment that was mentioned, Wu Shi Xian fell silent. After a long pause, he finally muttered, None of your business. Just figure out a way to fix this right now, or I'll smash this lousy shop to pieces. Easy there. A real man settles things with words, not fists. Let's talk this through. Teng Mo glanced at his computer screen. His game character had already died, so he simply quit the game. If you really can't find anyone, just go to the bathroom and take care of it yourself. Do I seriously have to teach you that? Wu Shi Xian's face was red all the way to his ears. Whether it was from embarrassment or the drug, it was impossible to tell. He struggled for a long time before finally forcing out the words, I already tried, but I just can't finish. Uft. Teng Mo nearly burst out laughing. The drug can't be that strong. It's not like this is your first time taking it. Wu Shi Xian stopped himself halfway through. You what? Teng Mo took off his headphones and looked at him in confusion. Wu Shi Xian stammered for what felt like forever without managing to finish a single sentence. Finally, red-faced with frustration, he snapped. You old bastard. Are you going to give me the antidote or not? There really isn't an antidote. Teng Mo replied, both amused and exasperated. How about this? I've got a few DVDs here, hardcore stuff. I'll give them to you for free. Take them home, and, watch them while you take care of yourself. How does that sound? No. Wu Shi Xian refused without hesitation. Why not? Wu Shi Xian bit his lip, all his earlier confidence gone. I can't hold it anymore. Well, Teng Mo pointed toward the back of the shop. Want to borrow my TV? No, Wu Shi Xian shook his head again. Then why not this time? Teng Mo was beginning to lose his patience. This time, Wu Shi Xian avoided his gaze. Lowering his head, he stood there awkwardly for a long moment before quietly saying, I need to use the bathroom. At last, Teng Mo understood. That was the real problem. For any man, trying to urinate while fully erect is nearly impossible. During an erection, the prostate becomes engorged with blood, partially blocking the urethra, while the swollen erectile tissue compresses the urinary tract. With an ordinary morning erection, which is usually less rigid, it might still be possible to force out some urine. But Wu Shi Xian had taken that drug. He was so hard it seemed he could shatter glass. There was no chance he could pee. He had drunk so much alcohol that night. If he still hadn't relieved himself, his bladder had to be close to bursting. Teng Mo had honestly meant well when he gave him the drug. He simply hadn't expected it to work so quickly or so powerfully on a young man. Now the situation had become rather troublesome. Wu Shi Xian waited for a moment. Seeing that Teng Mo remained silent, he finally asked, Is there any way? His face was crimson, and his handsome brows were tightly knit with embarrassment. To help me pee? There is one way, I suppose, Teng Mo answered hesitantly. What is it? Wu Shi Xian's eyes lit up. The first option is to go to the emergency room. A nurse will help you. No way. Wu Shi Xian rejected the idea immediately. I am absolutely not going to the hospital for something like this. Then the only other option is for me to help you. Teng Mo stood up and rubbed his hands together. But you have to listen to me. Do exactly what I say. Wu Shi Xian looked at the man responsible for his current humiliation with mixed emotions. Teng Mo had such a gentle, honest face, yet he had pulled such a devious trick. Still, he needed his help, so he had no choice but to swallow his pride. Fine, as long as you can help me. I'll do whatever you say. Go inside and wait for me. Teng Mo pointed toward the small door leading to the back room before adding, Take off your pants, too. Wu Shi Xian's expression darkened instantly. What? Didn't you just say you'd do whatever I told you? Teng Mo frowned. How are you supposed to pee with your pants still on? Do you want to soak them? Oh, Wu Shi Xian replied awkwardly as he walked toward the back room. Back there? Yeah. Teng Mo stepped out from behind the counter and headed to the front entrance. He pulled down the rolling shutter, locked it securely, then carefully locked the glass door as well. Only then did he turn and head toward the back room. Chapter 6. Will it hurt? Right here. Wu Shi Xian stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room. As Teng Mo walked in, snapping on a pair of rubber gloves, he saw Wu Shi Xian still standing there like a statue. He frowned. Why haven't you taken your pants off yet? Wu Shi Xian's face turned bright red. Who the hell takes their pants off in the living room? You want to go to the bedroom? Teng Mo looked genuinely surprised. That's probably not a good idea. What if you get everything all over my bed? How am I supposed to sleep tonight? Your mom. Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth and swallowed the rest of the insult. Hurry up. Teng Mo finished pulling on the gloves and tore open a plastic package with a sharp rip, removing a coiled transparent latex tube with a clear balloon-like tip. Didn't you say you couldn't hold it anymore? What's that? Wu Shi Xian asked uneasily as Teng Mo shook it open. A urinary catheter. Teng Mo held up the ballooned end. It goes into the tip of your dick. Then I inflate this balloon so it stays anchored inside your bladder and won't slip out. Wu Shi Xian shivered. Is it really effective? Of course it is. In hospitals, people with urinary retention get catheterized all the time. Teng Mo pointed toward the sofa, signaling for him to sit down. Once it's in, you'll be able to empty your bladder. Holding it for too long can damage bladder function. Wu Shi Xian still looked deeply uneasy. Will it hurt? It won't hurt. Teng Mo spoke with the confidence of a seasoned swindler, delivering complete nonsense with a perfectly sincere expression. At most, it might itch a little. After hesitating for what felt like forever, Wu Shi Xian finally walked over and sat down on the sofa. Teng Mo dragged over a stool and sat in front of him. Oh right. This catheter kit costs 60. I won't charge you for inserting it, but you do have to pay for the supplies. Don't forget to settle the bill afterward. Highway robbery, you old bastard, Wu Shi Xian muttered darkly. What was that? Teng Mo raised an eyebrow. Nothing. Sit still and pull your pants down to your thighs. Wu Shi Xian struggled internally for a moment. The overwhelming pressure in his bladder finally won out, and with a resigned sigh, he undid his belt. He was wearing a pair of faded jeans, and the tightness had already been unbearable. As soon as he unzipped them, he clenched his teeth and yanked his underwear down in one swift motion. A fully erect, impressively large member sprang free. Teng Mo couldn't help blurting out, "Damn." Even though he owned an adult shop, he rarely had the chance to see another man's anatomy up close, let alone examine it from this distance. The size, the shape, the color, the texture. It looked far more convincing than any dildo he sold. But judging by how swollen and rigid it was, with veins standing out prominently beneath the skin, he realized that if something wasn't done soon, it really might reach its limit. Without wasting another second, Teng Mo embraced the professional spirit of an adult shop owner evaluating a product and reached out to grab it. It felt like gripping an oversized electric curling iron. Not only was it rock hard, it was burning hot. Wu Shi Xian shuddered violently. The veins at his temples bulged as he forced himself to swallow an entire string of curses. Holding Wu Shi Xian's member steady with his left hand, Teng Mo used his thumb to expose the opening before bringing the tip of the catheter closer with his right. Just as the tube was about to touch him, Wu Shi Xian suddenly jerked backward. Wait. Have you ever actually inserted one of these before? Nope, Teng Mo answered boldly, without the slightest trace of embarrassment. I'm not a urologist. Where would I get the chance? But I've always wanted to try it. And today my dream is finally coming true. Dream my ass. Damn it. Are you using me as your guinea pig? Wu Shi Xian finally snapped. He slapped Teng Mo's hand away, knocking the catheter aside. Get lost. Teng Mo didn't argue. Instead, he suddenly drove his hand hard into Wu Shi Xian's lower abdomen. Caught completely off guard, Wu Shi Xian cried out in pain. His face instantly flushed a deep crimson, and he was left gasping for breath, unable to utter another curse. In your condition, if you won't let me insert it, then you can just wait for your bladder to burst, Teng Mo said calmly. Then I'll call an ambulance. Congratulations, you'll become famous. Everyone on Bar Street will know you got carted off to the hospital because your bladder exploded. Wu Shi Xian's face grew even uglier. But what if you poke something? What if you put it in the wrong place? That won't happen. It's basically a straight path. How could I possibly miss? Teng Mo replied casually, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Almost nobody accidentally sticks one into the vas deferens. If I happen to scrape the skin a little, the worst that happens is you take some antibiotics. It's no big deal. To Wu Shi Xian, however, Every word sounded horrifying. What man would think a torn or bleeding dick was no big deal? Absolutely impossible. That was the most precious part of a man's body. The mere image of blood spurting from it made his scalp go numb. No, no way. I really can't do it. Wu Shi Xian grabbed Teng Mo's wrists and pushed him away. Isn't there any other option? Teng Mo spread his hands. Nope. Otherwise, you'll have to go to the hospital. No, come on. Think of something else, Wu Shi Xian pleaded. You run a shop like this. You've got to have plenty of tricks up your sleeve. Teng Mo narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. There is another way, but it isn't necessarily any easier than inserting a catheter. Are you sure you want to try it? Wu Shi Xian nodded vigorously. As long as nothing gets shoved in there, I'll try anything. All right. Teng Mo looked at him. Have you ever heard of squirting? Chapter 7. Your technique is no good. Wu Shi Xian stared blankly at Teng Mo for a moment. After a long pause, he nodded awkwardly. I've heard of it. Then do you know that men can experience squirting too? Wu Shi Xian shook his head in confusion. Let me explain the theory first. Squirting refers to the expulsion of fluid from the urethral opening during orgasm. Normally, it's impossible for a man to urinate while erect because the engorged erectile tissue and the prostate compress the urinary tract. However, there is one exception. If the muscles surrounding the urethra receive sufficiently intense stimulation, triggering an extreme sensitivity response, squirting can occur. Teng Mo spoke calmly and matter-of-factly, while Wu Shi Xian's face gradually turned a deep shade of red with embarrassment. Some studies suggest that the fluid expelled during squirting is prostatic fluid mixed with hormone-containing secretions. However, a considerable number of studies argue that it's actually urine, forced out by muscle spasms caused by intense sexual stimulation. Stop! Wu Shi Xian finally interrupted, unable to bear it any longer. Don't say another word. I don't understand any of this. Just tell me what I need to do. Simply put, squirting is essentially urinary incontinence during orgasm. It may not sound very dignified, but it can solve your problem. Teng Mo looked at Wu Shi Xian expectantly. Do you want to give it a try? Wu Shi Xian asked stiffly. How do I do that? I've tried jerking off before, but nothing comes out. That's because your technique is no good. Leave it to me. With that, Teng Mo stood up and walked out to the front of the shop to retrieve a few things. Wu Shi Xian looked up and saw him returning with a large bottle of lubricant and what appeared to be an absorbent incontinence pad. Standing in front of the sofa, Teng Mo looked at Wu Shi Xian, then at the sofa itself with a pained expression. Maybe we should do this in the bathroom instead. This sofa would be a pain to clean. Wu Shi Xian shot him a resentful glare. He'd met plenty of irritating people in his life, but never anyone quite this exasperating. Still, since it was someone else's home, he didn't really have a say in the matter. He tried to tuck his gear back into his pants, but it was rock hard and standing at full attention, refusing to cooperate. After struggling for quite a while, he still couldn't even pull up the zipper. Don't bother putting them back on. You'll just have to take them off again in a minute anyway, Teng Mo said gently, seeing how much trouble he was having. It's only a few steps. Just walk over like that. The logic was hard to argue with, so Wu Shi Xian reluctantly gave up. Blushing furiously, he stood and followed Teng Mo into the bathroom, letting his bird swing freely as he walked. Once inside, he realized the bathroom was surprisingly spacious. Teng Mo's apartment wasn't large, consisting of only a living room and a bedroom, but the bathroom covered roughly 10 square meters. Besides the vanity and toilet, there was an enormous bathtub. Warm yellow tiles decorated the walls with a simple yet elegant floral pattern, making it obvious that the renovation had been done with great care. You should. Teng Mo glanced at the bathtub before pointing toward the toilet instead. Sit on the closed toilet lid. Wu Shi Xian did as instructed. Teng Mo stood beside him for a moment before suddenly remembering something. Wait here for a second. He hurried out of the bathroom. 2 minutes later, Teng Mo returned wearing a raincoat and carrying an umbrella. What are you doing? Wu Shi Xian stared at him in disbelief as Teng Mo calmly buttoned up the raincoat. Before we officially begin, I need to take every possible precaution, Teng Mo said. Otherwise, I'll end up with psychological trauma. Wu Shi Xian felt thoroughly insulted. What the hell? Isn't that taking it a little too far? You don't understand. Young man, you have absolutely no idea how peculiar the human body can be. Completely unfazed, Teng Mo carefully fastened the very top button of his raincoat. You'll see in a moment just how wise this decision is. Chapter 8. Feeling it now? Fully prepared, Teng Mo pulled over a chair and sat between Wu Shi Xian's spread legs. They held each other's gaze for a moment before Wu Shi Xian was the first to break eye contact. Looking away, his face flushed scarlet. He didn't dare look at his own shameless erection, nor at Teng Mo's hands, and said stiffly, "Hurry. Hurry up and start. Is that any way to ask someone for a favor?" Teng Mo teased. Even so, he quickly flipped open the cap of the lubricant and squeezed a generous amount into his palm. With his left hand, he steadied the erection, which was hard enough to bounce against the glass. Then, with his right hand, he slapped the cool lubricant onto the sensitive tip with a wet splat. The cold sensation made Wu Shi Xian shiver. He suspected Teng Mo was doing it on purpose, taking a little petty revenge. But with his lifeline in someone else's hands, all he could do was swallow his anger. To Wu Shi Xian's surprise, Teng Mo didn't use the usual up and down motion men relied on when masturbating. His technique was unusual. His left hand remained firmly wrapped around the base, holding it steady. His right hand curved into a loose cup, his palm centered over the opening at the tip. Instead of stroking the shaft, he gently circled the mushroom-shaped glands, rubbing only the area around the urethral opening in slow, rotating motions. Wu Shi Xian grew impatient. He had already secretly taken care of himself in the restroom before coming over. Even vigorous, straightforward stroking hadn't made him climax. With Teng Mo completely ignoring the shaft and focusing on that tiny spot at the tip, it seemed even less likely anything would happen. But before he could voice his doubts, he realized something was different. After only a short while of those circular motions, his legs began to tremble. He had assumed rubbing only the glands wouldn't produce much sensation, but Teng Mo's technique was astonishingly stimulating. Perhaps because no other part was being touched, every bit of his attention was concentrated on the sensitive tip. The sensation there had become almost unbearably intense. After only a few slow circles, he could barely remain seated. Wait. Wu Shi Xian suddenly panicked for no clear reason. He braced both hands against the closed toilet lid beneath him to keep himself from sliding off as his legs went weak. Teng Mo asked without stopping. Feeling something? And no. Wu Shi Xian's face burned bright red. Trying to hide his flustered state behind a fierce expression, he snapped, "Just wait." Wait for what? Teng Mo continued rubbing at an unhurried pace. Weren't you the one telling me to hurry up? The question left Wu Shi Xian momentarily stunned. Wait for what? What exactly was he waiting for? To gather himself? To prove he wasn't someone ruled by his lower body? Or simply to resist giving in to instinct? Before he could answer himself, the sensation struck. A strange urge to urinate suddenly surged through him. It terrified him. It felt like the moment just before peeing, yet at the same time like the instant before ejaculation. It was completely unlike anything he had experienced while masturbating, leaving him unable to tell exactly what his body was trying to do. And no, I can't. His trembling fingers grabbed Teng Mo's arm in panic. Something's coming out. So soon. Teng Mo was surprised as well, but he didn't stop. Instead, he increased the speed of the circular rubbing and applied slightly more pressure. Don't be nervous. Relax. Just let it happen. What is it? Wu Shi Xian clung to Teng Mo's arm as though it were a lifeline. His gums tingled, and every pass across the sensitive tip sent tiny shocks racing up his spine. Whatever it is, Teng Mo said calmly, don't hold it back. Just let it come out. Outwardly, he remained composed. Inside, however, he was anything but calm. This was the first time he had ever handled another man like this. What exactly was about to come out? Semen? Urine? Should he open the umbrella now? If he waited too long, it might be too late. Who knew when it would suddenly spray? But if he stopped now, would the sensation disappear and force them to start all over again? Countless thoughts flashed through Teng Mo's mind in an instant, but he forced them aside. He couldn't stop now. Wu Shi Xian's legs were shaking violently. He panted with his mouth open, his neck flushed crimson, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The erection in Teng Mo's hand had visibly swollen even more. The climax was only moments away. They had to see it through. Wu Shi Xian gripped the rim of the toilet with all his strength, veins bulging along his forearms. His bladder felt painfully swollen. Truthfully, he had been holding it for a long time. If he hadn't been completely desperate, he never would have come to seek help from the owner of an adult toy shop. Even now, he fought with everything he had to hold it in. He didn't want to pee. Not like this. And certainly not into another man's hands. It was unbearably humiliating. It completely contradicted the elegant image he had of himself and the songs he performed. But resisting was impossible. Just as Teng Mo had said, he knew almost nothing about the strange workings of the human body. Just as he hadn't understood why he had been unable to urinate before, he now couldn't understand why he was utterly incapable of stopping himself, no matter how hard he tried. Some things simply cannot be resisted. Rain falls. Mothers remarry. And he had to pee. Teng Mo watched Wu Shi Xian closely. The moment he saw Wu Shi Xian throw his head back against the toilet and gasp sharply, Teng Mo immediately released the base with his left hand and reached for the umbrella resting by his feet. Almost the instant the automatic mechanism snapped it open, a powerful stream burst from the erection still held in his right hand. It truly gushed out. Like a small fountain springing to life, the stream shot high into the air with surprising force. The instant it happened, Wu Shi Xian's eyes filled with tears. A wave of humiliation and sorrow washed over him. He had actually urinated into the hands of a man he had barely met. Yet the release itself brought overwhelming pleasure. It wasn't merely the relief of an overfull bladder. It felt astonishingly similar to the climax of ejaculation, perhaps even more intense. The pleasure was so powerful that his lower abdomen convulsed, and his legs shook uncontrollably. Perhaps he wasn't as detached or lofty as he had always believed. No one can escape the pull of human instinct. He was no exception. What a terrible, utterly inexplicable first experience. Chapter 9. Does it feel good? Tisk, tsk. Young people really do have incredible stamina. A little rubbing, and you're already spurting. Teng Mo clicked his tongue in admiration as he shook the water from his hands. His rubber gloves were soaked, and his umbrella dripped steadily, making him look as though he had just walked home through a torrential downpour. Wu Shi Xian leaned against the toilet tank, panting in a daze as he stared blankly at the white ceiling. Closing his umbrella, Teng Mo muttered to himself, I really should get a face shield. That'd be more convenient. Wu Shi Xian overheard him and struggled to sit upright. The moment he looked down at himself, a wave of shame and humiliation washed over him. He hadn't expected a spurt like that. At first, he'd thought the umbrella and raincoat were absurdly excessive, but now his entire body was soaked, leaving him in a thoroughly pathetic state. Even worse, he was still hard. That shameless thing stood rigidly upright, showing no sign of softening. Seeing Wu Shi Xian's usually icy expression twisted with embarrassment, Teng Mo realized that beneath the cold exterior, the man was actually quite thin-skinned. He said calmly, It's normal. The medication doesn't wear off that quickly. After a long pause, Wu Shi Xian finally forced the words out through clenched teeth. What was that just now? Teng Mo looked at him calmly. What do you think? Wu Shi Xian's voice was dry with nervousness. Was it urine? I don't know, Teng Mo replied. It didn't seem to have any smell. It might have just been water. Where did the water come from? Probably fluid from the bladder that hadn't been filtered yet, Teng Mo answered, glancing toward Wu Shi Xian's lower abdomen. How do you feel now? Is the pressure still as bad? Embarrassed by his gaze, Wu Shi Xian did his best to sound composed. It seems a little better. Oh, Teng Mo studied his expression. As though testing whether he was telling the truth, he suddenly placed a hand on Wu Shi Xian's lower abdomen, clearly intending to press down. Startled, Wu Shi Xian hurriedly cried out, Don't press. Teng Mo already knew the previous release hadn't been enough. It had only relieved the symptoms temporarily. The amount released wasn't sufficient to resolve Wu Shi Xian's condition. Shall we continue? He asked. Wu Shi Xian stared at him in disbelief. We have to keep going. I told you already. Teng Mo said matter-of-factly, as though discussing nothing more serious than the weather. This drug could keep you hard for a very long time. Maybe not a full 3 days, but definitely more than 10 hours. If we don't deal with it completely, the moment you walk out my door, you'll end up at the hospital anyway. Wu Shi Xian pressed his lips together. After struggling with himself for a long while, he finally asked hesitantly, Can we continue? Of course. Teng Mo spread Wu Shi Xian's legs apart, moved closer, and adjusted his rubber gloves. But stimulating just the head probably won't be enough anymore. We'll need to stimulate other areas to build the pleasure back up. Not knowing what Teng Mo intended to do, Wu Shi Xian instinctively felt a surge of fear. How do you know so much about this? He blurted out. Teng Mo calmly squeezed some lubricant into his hand and rubbed it between his palms. Kid, I run an adult shop. This is how I make my living. Wu Shi Xian fell silent. Teng Mo focused on what he was doing. His left hand steadied the base while his right formed a loose ring around the head, moving in a smooth, piston-like rhythm. Although it looked like an ordinary up-and-down stroke, his technique differed from how most men handled themselves. Rather than stroking all the way to the base, he concentrated almost entirely on stimulating the head. This time, though, his movements were much gentler. As he worked at an unhurried pace, he asked conversationally, "Did it feel good when you came just now?" "Why are you asking that?" Wu Shi Xian panted. He thought the man was unbelievably shameless. He was doing something so intimate, yet he looked as relaxed as though they were simply chatting over tea, casually asking such an embarrassing question. "I need customer feedback," Teng Mo replied. "You provide this kind of service for a lot of customers?" "No, you're the first. So you're planning to offer it in the future?" "Well, no." As he spoke, Teng Mo gradually increased the pace. Having climaxed only moments earlier, Wu Shi Xian was still extremely sensitive. Even the simple, repetitive motion was enough to send heat rushing through his body. His breathing became increasingly uneven. "Then what are you collecting customer feedback for?" "For the lubricant," Teng Mo answered with a perfectly straight face. "Lubricant is one of my best-selling products." He lied so confidently that he sounded completely sincere. "Why are you being so shy? Does it feel good or not?" Heat surged through Wu Shi Xian's body. After a long silence, he finally muttered through gritted teeth, "It feels good. It feels good, all right." "If it feels good, then make some noise," Teng Mo complained. "You're making it look like I'm collecting semen from a bull." Wu Shi Xian clenched his fists, his face burning bright red. "You want to bet? I could punch you until your nose bleeds." "Oh," Teng Mo replied casually. "Sure. Let's see whether you can keep yourself from moaning later." Chapter 10. Can't tell male from female anymore. Rubber gloves lacked the sensation of skin-on-skin contact and possessed no soul, yet that did not hinder the human instincts triggered by the rhythmic, piston-like motion. Wu Shi Xian did not understand why Teng Mo was so fixated on that one tiny spot at the tip, but the method was clearly effective. His heart raced, his body temperature climbed, and his skin burned as if it were on fire. Teng Mo's hand moved faster and faster. He had initially approached this out of mere curiosity, but in such a confined space, it is easy to be swept up in another person's intense reaction. Wu Shi Xian was panting so heavily that the air itself seemed to heat up, making Teng Mo feel a rising sense of agitation. Wu Shi Xian's hands clawed futilely at the smooth rim of the toilet bowl. Why did the sensation feel so overwhelming today? Was it the effect of the drug? Or was it because, for the first time, an outsider was gripping his most sensitive part? The pleasure was all-consuming, terrifying, yet intoxicating and addictive. It was a sensation he had never experienced or even imagined before. He desperately wanted to grab onto something, but found nothing to hold. His pride would not allow him to clutch at Teng Mo's hand. His heart hammered, and the rush of hot blood to his head blurred his vision. He bit down hard on his lower lip to keep from letting out the sound that seemed ready to burst from his throat. Teng Mo shifted his neck, feeling uncomfortable. Perhaps the raincoat lacked breathability, or the rubber gloves were too tight. He felt sweltering. His hand was sweating inside the glove, creating an unpleasant, clammy slickness. Yet he could not simply take the glove off. Some acts carry a completely different meaning depending on whether gloves are worn or not. "I will have to take a quick shower once this is over. I am drenched in sweat. Should I make this kid shower here before he leaves, too?" As Teng Mo's mind wandered to random thoughts, his hand lost its restraint. He unconsciously gave a few quick, rough strokes. Wu Shi Xian let out a low, nasal sound and arched his back in unbearable need, pressing himself further into Teng Mo's grasp. Teng Mo snapped back to reality, keenly picking up on that subtle reaction. Yet, instead of giving Wu Shi Xian what he craved, he stopped the stroking motion. He switched to the initial technique, cupping his palm into a bowl shape and circling the tip, rotating his hand to rub against the flushed, sensitive head of the member. Wu Shi Xian's legs immediately began to tremble, and a look of panic flashed in his eyes. No, I cannot. I cannot. He frantically tried to push Teng Mo's hand away, but the friction had left his entire back feeling weak and limp. He could not muster any strength. He could only watch helplessly as Teng Mo repeatedly tormented that tiny, hypersensitive spot, dragging him into a dark, swirling abyss while an overwhelming wave of pleasure surged through his entire body. He felt both frightened and aggrieved. Why force him to succumb like this? Why give him this pleasure that felt like it came straight from hell? What was he supposed to do now? What if he could not forget this feeling? His vision blurred, clutching Teng Mo's sleeve. He could not even string a coherent sentence together. You cannot. You cannot do this. Teng Mo swallowed hard. The heat inside the raincoat was making his mouth go dry. What was happening with the person before him? On stage, he was a cold, unyielding lone wolf. Yet now he looked like a startled young deer. His high ponytail had come loose, and a few strands of ash-blue hair fell forward, softening the sharp lines of his jaw. Those long, narrow eyes, usually so fierce and intimidating, now held a flush of red that gave them an unexpected, vulnerable look. And those alluring blue lips were no longer pressed tightly shut. Wu Shi Xian gasped heavily, his mouth agape. The moisture from his breath made his jewel-blue lips glisten, revealing the vivid crimson tip of his tongue within, a striking combination of intense colors that created a strangely alluring charm. Do not. Wu Shi Xian struggled helplessly in Teng Mo's grasp, thrashing like a fish out of water. Breathing was an instinct, yet he found himself unable to do it. Despite his open mouth, no air entered, and he felt as though he were suffocating, his throat seized by an overwhelming, terrifying pleasure. The moment Wu Shi Xian's fingers dug desperately into him, Teng Mo knew the climax was imminent. Reason told him he should free a hand to grab the umbrella, lest he get splattered and look a mess. But for some reason, he did not want to stop for anything. He wanted to keep a firm grip on this switch, forcing this man, usually as cold and unyielding as cedar, to bow his proud spine and reveal a look of utter vulnerability. When the release finally came, a cry tore from deep within Wu Shi Xian's throat. Yet, instead of reaching for the umbrella as he had the first time, Teng Mo kept up the friction even as the fluid gushed out. Oh! The jet of fluid, initially shooting straight out, scattered in all directions as Teng Mo rotated his wrist. Wu Shi Xian's entire body shuddered violently. The sensation of being stimulated while gushing was a mix of pain and ecstasy, akin to the moment a bone is snapped back into place. His waist and lower abdomen spasmed rhythmically. His lower body went numb, and his legs felt as if they no longer belonged to him. He had not wanted to cry out. He did not want this wicked man to mock him or witness such a shameful display, but the sounds were unstoppable. He had lost control. He had surrendered command of his own body. As Wu Shi Xian experienced a massive, gushing climax, Teng Mo felt himself breaking into a sweat, as if he had surged to the peak right alongside him. And indeed, he could feel a distinct stirring in his own groin. Damn it! Had he been single so long that the lines between male and female were starting to blur? How could giving a man a handjob end up giving him an erection? It was probably just empathy. Yeah, Teng Mo reassured himself, it was empathy. As a man, witnessing someone else's orgasmic reaction naturally triggered a strong sense of empathy. It was just like watching porn. Right, that had to be it. Chapter 11. Good Boys Don't Lie. This time, Teng Mo did not give Wu Shi Xian any time to catch his breath. Immediately after the second ejaculation, he reapplied lubricant and seamlessly began grinding for a third round, alternating between piston-like thrusting and rotational friction. Wu Shi Xian's eyes glazed over, and his fingers trembled uncontrollably. He watched Teng Mo's movements with near terror, his voice shaking. Don't do it. I just. Teng Mo refused flatly. No. Right now, your cock is at its most sensitive. All the effort before this was to push that sensitivity to a high threshold. A few casual strokes now are enough to make you come again. You need to empty your bladder while you can. Wu Shi Xian was on the verge of a breakdown from the friction. He had never been this humiliated in his life, not even when his family faced catastrophe, or when his future looked bleak and life was a struggle, had he ever bowed his head. Yet now, unable to control his own bladder, he could only cling to the man in humiliation, pleading, "I emptied it. I already emptied it." Teng Mo looked calmly into Wu Shi Xian's eyes. Good boys don't lie. Then, with a swift, emotionless rotation of his hand, and to no one's surprise, Wu Shi Xian let out a hoarse cry and ejaculated for the third time. This time, the release was more voluminous and violent than the previous two, accompanied by uncontrollable full-body spasms. It felt as though his bladder was broken, his urethra was broken, and even that useless cock of his was broken. Nothing would obey him anymore. With so much fluid spurting out, he had become a toy in this man's hands, molded and manipulated at will, told to come, and he truly did. Yet, despite the humiliation and shame, despite the crushing sense of immorality, and despite the fact that he didn't actually want to be toyed with like this, he was powerless to stop the orgasm from washing over him. That ultimate pleasure, the kind that felt like it was draining him dry while sending him straight to heaven, was something he had never experienced in his 21 years of life. He felt his bladder spasming, the immense pressure as the stream forced its way through his urethra, and the shuddering friction against its walls sent waves of ecstasy, so intense his vision began to black out. He was completely undone, unable to mount any form of resistance. Whether those hands were dragging him to hell or lifting him to heaven, he could only surrender to the descent. Teng Mo took a few suppressed breaths, trying to keep his breathing steady, though Wu Shi Xian was trembling violently and panting in a way that was maddeningly arousing. For a moment, his heart had raced, a surge of adrenaline and rising blood pressure, but he didn't want to show it. His forehead was slick with sweat, or perhaps water that had splashed onto his face, leaving him uncomfortably damp. He wanted to wipe it away, but his hands were dripping wet too. His rubber gloves were coated in a mixture of lubricant and various bodily fluids, and his raincoat was splattered with water. Teng Mo was surprised by his own reaction. He wasn't a germaphobe, but was this a situation most men could accept? Could one really remain this calm when faced with another male's bodily fluids? Yet, he felt no disgust, nor did he find the man before him repulsive. In fact, he was intrigued, wanting to see even more of him in the throes of climax. Was it because of that ice-cold, magazine cover face of his? Had his values been swayed by those stunning looks? Or was it simply because he sang so beautifully? As these thoughts crossed his mind, Teng Mo's gaze returned to Wu Shi Xian. After that round of ejaculation, Wu Shi Xian was practically collapsing onto the toilet. His clothes and trousers were soaked, and his eyes were glistening with moisture. The naturally cool, pale complexion that usually gave him an air of ascetic detachment was now flushed with a seductive, rosy hue. The faint red tint at the corners of his eyes and brows made him look like a celestial being descending to the mortal realm, a deity stepping down from a lotus throne, stained by the colors of earthly desire. Seeing him like that, Teng Mo suddenly felt a surge of heated, illicit desire rising within him, making him feel even more restless and feverish. His hands, his face, everything felt uncomfortable, a strange, agitated sensation he couldn't quite put into words. The rubber gloves had become unbearable, and the sweat on his face was maddeningly irritating. After hesitating for only a few seconds, Teng Mo decisively tore off the rubber gloves and tossed them into a nearby trash can. He then wiped the sweat from his forehead and gave his own face a quick pat. Wu Shi Xian glanced at Teng Mo, his eyelids flushed pink. Teng Mo looked back. They locked eyes for a moment, and Wu Shi Xian, who had been panting heavily, suddenly went quiet, as if he had momentarily stopped breathing. There were still traces of moisture at the corners of his eyes. Teng Mo watched the lingering droplets on his lower lashes, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. The air grew dry and charged, as if a tiny spark could ignite a blaze at any moment. Then Teng Mo made the first move, not to grab a fresh pair of gloves or adjust his raincoat, but to reach out directly and take hold of Wu Shi Xian. Wu Shi Xian jerked violently. He was no longer wearing gloves. although rubber gloves are merely a thin layer. And theoretically, the difference shouldn't be significant. The actual sensation was worlds apart. Human palms possess warmth, unique textures, and emotion. If everything done previously could be explained away as merely helping to solve a problem, after all, gloves were being worn, much like a doctor or nurse performing a task. Then what was the reason for this? But Wu Shi Xian truly lacked the energy to think any further. He felt as though he was on the verge of spurting again. The man's palm was searingly hot, and every rotation, every friction, every intimate contact between those fine palm lines and the sensitive head of his member made his waist ache and his legs turn to jelly. It took little effort for Teng Mo to trigger another massive spurt, violent and spectacular. Tears welled up, saliva pooled in his mouth, and the moisture was wrung from his body through every possible channel. Really, I can't take any more. Wu Shi Xian's voice was thick with a sob. Clutching Teng Mo's sleeve, he stammered, spurting too much. How could a human body hold so much fluid? How could a bladder possibly contain such a vast amount of water? He had ejaculated so many times, each burst more violent than the last. Where was all this fluid coming from? He felt as though he were truly being wrung dry. Would he die if every drop of moisture drained away? It seemed like a rather pleasant way to go, yet he couldn't die just yet. There were things he had to do, and people he couldn't bear to leave behind. More and more fluid gushed out. A mere rub or two from Teng Mo was enough to trigger another release. He felt that after so many rounds of friction, his member ought to be numb or going soft by now, but it wasn't. His cock remained hard, and he kept spurting, trapped in the ecstatic clouds of an unending climax. Eventually, even Teng Mo began to feel a twinge of alarm. Wu Shi Xian was spasming violently, spurting with such force and volume, an astonishing amount that seemed impossible for a human body to contain, that Teng Mo wondered if he might actually kill him if he kept going. Just as Teng Mo hesitated, wondering whether to stop, his wrist was seized. Wu Shi Xian gripped it with a desperate, dying strength, like someone summoning their final reserves of energy, and whispered, I still don't know your name. Teng Mo didn't understand why he would ask this at such a moment, but he answered gently nonetheless. Teng Mo, Teng as in vine. Mo as in the ink used for painting and calligraphy. Teng Mo, really, please, don't do it anymore. Wu Shi Xian looked up at him with wet eyelashes. Shattered starlight seemed to have fallen into those beautiful eyes, and said, I'm scared. Teng Mo froze, as if something had suddenly landed upon his heart, striking it with a clear, resonant sound. Chapter 12, Not a Drop Left. Ugh. Wu Shi Xian's eyes rolled back as he spasmed. His legs shook violently, and his lower abdomen clenched in waves. His mind felt empty, incapable of thought, leaving only the weightless sensation of floating high among the clouds. Teng Mo had originally intended to stop, but the way Wu Shi Xian expressed his fear with such a fragile look made him change his mind. He wanted to plant a seed in this man, to make him remember this sensation for a lifetime. Even if he went on to live a life completely separate from Teng Mo's, he would never forget this night of intoxicating decadence, nor the little shop that existed both in the dead of night and deep within his own soul. So, instead of stopping, Teng Mo thrust faster and harder, grinding until Wu Shi Xian cried out in a daze, until he convulsed through repeated, gushing orgasms, until he was utterly drained, with not a single drop left to give. At that point, any further friction against his cock was beyond human endurance. The moment Teng Mo's hand touched him, Wu Shi Xian would jerk and cry out, thrashing like a fish struck by electricity. When Teng Mo finally let go and stood up, Wu Shi Xian slumped limply to the floor, heedless of whether the bathroom tiles were clean or covered in water stains. He was utterly spent. The stimulation, both physical and emotional, had been overwhelming. Teng Mo turned to the sink to give his hands a quick rinse and began undoing the buttons of his raincoat. Losing patience after just a few, he grabbed the lapels and tore the coat open, stripping it off in a few swift motions and tossing it aside. Still feeling hot, he removed his jacket as well and splashed a handful of cold water onto his face. Only then did he look up, catching sight of Wu Shi Xian slumped beside the toilet in the mirror. That man. It looked as though he had truly been broken. A face that ought to have looked down upon the world with disdain was now left in a state of utter disarray by Teng Mo's own hands. Tears, saliva, and sweat streaked across that flushed face. With half-lidded eyes, parted lips, a smear of jewel blue at the corner of his mouth, and a lock of hair plastered wetly against his temple, he looked decadent and undone, radiating an indescribable, erotic allure. Teng Mo's hand clenched involuntarily. His heart was pounding hard. He stared at Wu Shi Xian in the mirror for a long moment, swallowed hard, and wiped the water from his own face before walking over to pull Wu Shi Xian up. "Get up. Let's get you a shower." But Wu Shi Xian couldn't be pulled up at all. His legs were weak, and he couldn't stand. Teng Mo had to slide his arms under Wu Shi Xian's armpits and half-drag, half-carry him to the edge of the bathtub, settling him down so he could lean against it. "Hurry and take off those wet clothes. We're about the same height, so you can wear mine for now." Yet, when Teng Mo returned with a clean set of pajamas, Wu Shi Xian was still sitting by the tub with his head bowed, wearing the same soaked clothes. Teng Mo placed the clean clothes on the rack and walked over to crouch beside him. "What's wrong?" Wu Shi Xian kept his head down and remained silent, though the sound of his ragged breathing was audible. A closer look revealed that his shoulders were still trembling slightly. Teng Mo paused for a moment, then reached out to brush aside the wet hair clinging to Wu Shi Xian's forehead. He cupped the other man's face in his hands, guiding him to look up. Wu Shi Xian offered no resistance. Perhaps he simply lacked the strength to do so. He obediently lifted his head. His unfocused eyes, combined with the traces of tears and sweat, gave him a fragile, shattered beauty, like a piece of fine porcelain broken into shards, yet with every fragment still gleaming with a soft, warm luster. Teng Mo was momentarily dazed, only to hear Wu Shi Xian murmur, "Why want to go down yet?" Teng Mo glanced down between his legs. Sure enough, that thing was still standing erect, ruddy and poised for action, looking far more vigorous than its owner. Teng Mo thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you want it to go down?" Wu Shi Xian nodded against his palm. Having been worn down by Teng Mo all night, his sharp edges had been smoothed away, leaving him briefly docile. Teng Mo said, "Take off your wet clothes first, or you'll catch a cold." He reached out to undo Wu Shi Xian's jacket, but Wu Shi Xian caught his wrist. Their eyes met. Wu Shi Xian's gaze was misty, carrying the salty, damp air of a sea breeze. Teng Mo swallowed hard, his voice turning slightly hoarse. "I can make it go down, but no matter what I do next, you can't run away or hide. Can you do that?" Wu Shi Xian looked at Teng Mo, feeling a primal sense of fear, so he shook his head. Teng Mo let go of his lapels and pulled his hand back, just about to stand up, when he heard Wu Shi Xian say hesitantly, "How about you give it a try?" Chapter 13. You Old Brute. Hot water sprayed out from the shower head. Steam filled the air. The temperature in the bathroom rose. The atmosphere grew heavy with tiny water molecules, and breathing became thick and damp. Wu Shi Xian sat naked in the bathtub. The bathtub in Teng Mo's house was built-in and exceptionally spacious, its rim neatly lined with embossed tiles. Teng Mo sat on the edge of the bathtub, letting the shower spray against his back. This young man possessed a fine physique, a thin layer of muscle stretched smoothly over slender bones. He had the kind of lean build that never felt weak. The curve of his shoulders and neck, the clean lines of his arms, and his delicate butterfly shoulder blades were all shaped to absolute perfection. Even for another man, he was a rare sight, pleasing to the eye from every angle. Hot water slowly overflowed over the backs of his legs, and Wu Shi Xian hugged his knees with a measure of awkwardness. Asking Teng Mo to help him had been a momentary lapse in judgment, perhaps the result of a tired brain. Now, surrounded by the bubbling hot water, his body gradually relaxed as the tension ebbed away, and the awkwardness rushed in to take its place. "Warm?" Teng Mo asked in a remarkably mild tone. Before something beautiful, human beings naturally offered an extra measure of patience and gentleness. Wu Shi Xian could no longer maintain his composure. Sitting naked in the bathtub of a strange man's home while the other person sat fully dressed beside him was embarrassing enough, but the domestic casualness in Teng Mo's voice made it unbearable. He wanted to cut through the false politeness, get straight to the point, and bring this ridiculous situation to an end. With a cold expression, he asked, When do you plan to start? Teng Mo rinsed the back of his neck with hot water and asked unhurriedly. In such a hurry? Wu Shi Xian wiped the water from his face, masking his shyness behind a hard, cold voice. Let's just get it over with quickly. I have to go home. Teng Mo chuckled softly, hung up the shower head, and patted his own thigh. Come here. Hold my shoulders. Wu Shi Xian turned his head in surprise, looking first at Teng Mo's shoulder and then up into his eyes. Why? Huh? Teng Mo raised an eyebrow. Don't you have to listen to me if you want this solved? Don't you want to go home? Wu Shi Xian bit his lower lip, glaring resentfully at Teng Mo while trying to guess what scheme the old fox was hatching. Yet, the man genuinely seemed to know what he was doing and how to fix the problem. Reduced to his current state, he had no choice but to rely on him. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to put his pants back on, let alone walk out that front door. Fortunately, despite losing control earlier, he hadn't seen a single trace of disgust or revulsion on this man's face. Even if the owner of this small shop was a wicked scoundrel, perhaps he wasn't entirely beyond redemption. After a brief internal struggle, Wu Shi Xian reached out to steady himself against the wall and slowly stood up. He hadn't noticed while sitting down, but the moment he rose, his legs trembled and his lower abdomen ached fiercely. It felt as though he had run a 10-kilometer race back and forth. Those shameful scenes from earlier were definitely not hallucinations. He lowered his head to look at Teng Mo, wondering how to execute the command to hold his shoulders sitting in the tub. He couldn't reach them, but standing up made him tower over Teng Mo, who remained seated on the edge without the slightest intention of standing up to meet him halfway. If Teng Mo wouldn't come to him, he had no choice but to go to Teng Mo. Hesitating through every step, Wu Shi Xian finally gritted his teeth, leaned forward, and reached out to grab Teng Mo's shoulders. Whether it was because the bathtub surface was too slick, his center of gravity was thrown off, or his weak legs simply refused to support him, his feet suddenly slipped before his hands ever touched Teng Mo, and he lunged forward. Be careful! Teng Mo caught him the instant he slipped, pulling him securely into his arms. Startled, Wu Shi Xian wrapped his arms around Teng Mo's neck, only to realize the next second that he was sprawled across Teng Mo's lap, with Teng Mo's hands supporting his hips. He moved to push Teng Mo away, but Teng Mo gave his rear a firm pat and commanded, "Don't move." Before Wu Shi Xian could react, Teng Mo hoisted his entire body upward, lifted one of his legs, and rested it on the rim of the bathtub to give him stability. A sharp slap echoed through the room as Teng Mo coated his hands in cold lubricant behind Wu Shi Xian's back. Before Wu Shi Xian could process what was happening, Teng Mo smeared the slick fluid across his buttocks and pressed it down along the seam of his hips. Wu Shi Xian shuddered, a sudden sense of dread washing over him. What are you going to do? Teng Mo kept his expression light and harmless. Show some respect for your elders. Before the words had even faded, his fingers pushed straight inside. Chapter 14. Take your finger out. Take your finger out. Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth as he dug his fingers into Teng Mo's shoulders. Teng Mo feigned innocence. Wasn't it you who asked me to try? As he spoke, he mischievously slid his finger a little deeper inside. Ugh! Wu Shi Xian shuddered uncontrollably. He couldn't believe the man had actually shoved a finger into that place. I'm not doing this anymore. You fucking take your finger out. You overused your front end earlier, so it's currently in a refractory period. You can't ejaculate the conventional way right now. We have to use the back. Teng Mo spoke with calm composure. He always managed to discuss such shameful matters in a perfectly ordinary tone without batting an eye. But did you know? Men have an organ called the prostate. When the erectile tissue engorges with blood, the prostate does too, becoming a small, hard lump that's easy to feel from the back. As he spoke, Teng Mo actually began rotating his finger, searching around inside Wu Shi Xian's body. Wu Shi Xian was overcome with a mix of shame and rage at the finger churning inside him. Under normal circumstances, he would never have allowed this man to humiliate him like this, but today he was truly helpless. The squirting had drained his energy, and after so many rounds of lovemaking, even the fittest body couldn't withstand such a battering. His limbs were so weak and sore that they trembled at the slightest exertion. If Teng Mo hadn't been supporting him, he likely would have already slid down into the bathtub. But he couldn't just let the other guy toy with him like this. Wu Shi Xian, face flushed bright red, was about to snap at him when he heard Teng Mo suddenly say, found it. Here, right here. It'll make you feel so good. I don't want any good. Wu Shi Xian's refusal cut off abruptly. His eyes went wide, and a dazed, involuntary sound escaped his lips. MMPH. Teng Mo chuckled softly, certain he'd hit the right spot. He twirled his finger, withdrew it slightly, then thrust it back in hard, pressing and prodding that specific area while whispering. Feels amazing, doesn't it? Wu Shi Xian clamped a hand over his mouth. How is this happening? How can getting fingered in the ass feel like this? What the hell is going on? But it was terrifying, too. There really was a spot inside him that, when stimulated, sent electric shocks through his body. A tingling numbness spread from his lower abdomen down to his perineum. A strange, itchy sort of tingle completely different from the sensation of jerking off. How to describe it? It was a tingling sensation that radiated outward, making even his inner thighs tingle so intensely it made his teeth chatter. Take it out. Wu Shi Xian gritted out the words, afraid to unclench his teeth lest a strange sound escape his throat. That finger had turned his waist to jelly and sapped the strength from his limbs. He felt like he was collapsing right into Teng Mo's arms. But the position was becoming a struggle for Teng Mo, too. Wu Shi Xian had gone limp, sliding down like water. Twisting his body to hold him up was awkward, and with no back support, he wouldn't be able to hold the pose for long. He simply withdrew his finger, catching Wu Shi Xian off guard and eliciting a short, sharp, as the younger man's neck jerked back. Before Wu Shi Xian could catch his breath, Teng Mo dragged him backward until his own back was against the wall of the bathtub, then hoisted Wu Shi Xian up to straddle his lap, making it more comfortable for both of them. To do a good job, one must first sharpen one's tools. After adjusting his posture, Teng Mo unhurriedly stroked Wu Shi Xian's back, as if to help him relax, and asked in a casual tone, "How is it? This stuff works better than Viagra, doesn't it? It amplifies every sensation and makes your body far more sensitive than usual. Plus, it's cheaper than Viagra. Have you thought about?" Wu Shi Xian, however, didn't seem to be listening. He propped himself up against Teng Mo's chest, staring straight at him with those crimson eyes. Teng Mo felt a bit odd under that gaze. Thinking Wu Shi Xian had noticed his heavy breathing, he tried to steady his breath and asked, "What is it?" Wu Shi Xian hesitated for a moment before pointing a finger between their legs and asking, "What is this?" Teng Mo followed the direction of his finger and realized. Oh, damn it. They were pressed so close together that Wu Shi Xian's rock-hard member was poking right into the tent-like bulge in Teng Mo's own trousers. In that instant, even someone as practiced at lying through his teeth as Teng Mo couldn't help but betray a flash of embarrassment and panic. "Why are you?" Wu Shi Xian looked at him in disbelief. After a pause, he asked, "Are you gay?" Fortunately, Teng Mo had been selling adult products for 5 years. While he hadn't necessarily honed other skills, he had certainly developed a thick skin. He quickly composed himself and countered, "What if I said I was? Would you find me disgusting?" Wu Shi Xian looked troubled, his handsome, sword-like brows knitting together. "I don't know, but anyway, I'm not." "I know you're not," Teng Mo smiled. "But who's to blame for that? You could have gone to those young girls, or older women. Anyone would have done, and I'm sure they'd have been happy to help you. Yet, you chose to come to me." Teng Mo had a gentle, kindly face, but at this moment, Wu Shi Xian found his smile chilling, because he said, "I'm a man, you know. Before you came to me, did it never cross your mind that you might get fucked?" Chapter 15. My size isn't even that big. What are you so nervous about? Teng Mo. Calm down. Wu Shi Xian was pinned against the outer rim of the bathtub by Teng Mo. He flailed his limbs in a panic, trying to scramble away, but it was utterly useless. The tub was too slippery. Just as he managed to inch his way out, Teng Mo grabbed him by the hips and hauled him right back. "I am calm. You are the one who needs to calm down." Teng Mo knelt composedly behind Wu Shi Xian, his hands gripping Wu's waist firmly. "Do not panic. I already thoroughly stretched you out, and my size is not even that big. What are you so nervous about? It will not hurt, rest assured. Get lost." Wu Shi Xian shouted, on the verge of a breakdown. I am not. I am not afraid of the pain. I just do not want a man sticking it up my ass. He had no idea how things had spiraled to this point. If he had known that this old bastard would commit such an unconscionable, taboo-defying act just because his secret was exposed, he would have been better off pretending he had not noticed a thing. He was truly trapped now. There was no turning back. He could already feel something searingly hot pressing against his rear. A sense of imminent danger loomed over him. At this rate, he was really going to get buggered. Yet, his limbs were weak and limp, and no matter how desperately he struggled, he could not break free from the man's iron grip. Be good. We already used fingers, did we not? You clearly enjoyed it. Teng Mo pressed one hand against the back of Wu Shi Xian's neck, pinning him against the edge of the tub, while his other hand grasped his own member and began attempting to push it inside. The surge of desire, combined with the physical effort required to pin down another man, disrupted the breathing he usually kept so well controlled. He took a couple of ragged, hurried breaths and growled in a low voice. But you know the situation. Fingers alone cannot satisfy you now. Have you forgotten what I said? If I do not fuck your ass, it will stay hard for 3 days. Can you handle that? I can handle it. Wu Shi Xian thrashed about, desperate to get away from the rock-hard weapon pressing against him from behind. Mind your own business. Just let me rot. Not a chance. Since you came to me, I have to see the job through. Teng Mo's patience began to fray as Wu Shi Xian's violent struggling caused him to miss the mark a few times. I am seeing this all the way to the end. Before he could even finish the sentence, Teng Mo thrust his hips sharply forward. Get lost. Save my ass. Wu Shi Xian was cursing as he reached for the nearby shelving unit, trying to find some leverage. But before his fingertips could even touch the shelf, a sudden, searing pain shot through him from behind, so intense it made his vision go black, and he threw his head back, letting out an uncontrolled, piercing scream. Ah! Something had forced its way inside. That old bastard had actually rammed his cock into his ass. Be a good boy, and you will not suffer as much. Teng Mo hissed, sucking in sharp breaths. He had thought the preparation, the stretching and the generous amount of lubricant, was sufficient, so he had steeled himself and thrust in. He had not expected Wu Shi Xian to still be so tight. The moment he entered, that constricted passage clamped down on him with a grip so fierce it made his legs tremble. Wu Shi Xian lay sprawled over the edge of the bathtub, his hands and head hanging limp and lifeless on the outside. His eyes welled up with tears. The offending member, wedged deep inside him, seemed to drain every ounce of strength from his body. He could hardly believe he was actually being taken by a man. Barely able to speak through gritted teeth, he forced out the words, "It hurts. Get out." Breathing heavily, Teng Mo gave Wu Shi Xian's buttocks a slap. Relax. It will not hurt if you relax. Trust me. In a little while, I will make you feel good. Chapter 16. All resistance is futile. Steam condensed into droplets that rolled down their skin. The air grew thick and heavy with their breathing. The bathtub filled until the water began to spill over the sides. Wu Shi Xian tilted his head back in a daze, one hand bracing against the rim of the tub, and the other helplessly clutching the wall, forced to endure wave after wave of thrusting from behind. The overflowing hot water churned noisily with their movements, the splashing sound assaulting their eardrums and making their hearts race. Water sprayed everywhere, damp and scalding hot. The wet slapping of flesh, the violent splashing, the ragged gasps, and the stifled moans wove together into an expression of raw, unadulterated desire. You animal! Wu Shi Xian's voice was shattered by Teng Mo's thrusts. He couldn't string together a single coherent sentence. He felt dizzy, his brain throbbing and numb. He couldn't tell if it was the drugs or if this bastard was simply incredibly experienced. It had hurt enough to break into a cold sweat when penetration first began, but as the thrusting continued, in and out, the pain of the intrusion gradually faded, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar sensation. His body felt full and stretched tight, yet it wasn't just fullness. Something else was quietly taking root deep within him. He tried desperately to ignore the change, but the human body is honest, and the realization left Wu Shi Xian feeling mortified. Who would have thought that he, young and vigorous, would end up being taken by an older man who looked like he couldn't even hurt a fly? He began to suspect that the guy had drugged him on purpose, and that the earlier rounds of forced orgasms had been a calculated scheme to drain his stamina. But what could he do? With his limbs weak and trembling, all resistance proved futile, serving only to further fuel the passion. The harder he struggled, the deeper that bastard thrust, deep enough to terrify him, deep enough to make him tremble. After one particularly powerful thrust, Teng Mo paused to catch his breath. He was getting on in years and hadn't felt this kind of excitement or engaged in such strenuous physical activity in a long time. His heart was pounding so violently it felt almost unbearable. The man before him lay slumped against the rim of the bathtub, head turned slightly to rest on his arm as he panted. Gazing at that back, so white it seemed to glow, Teng Mo felt a complex emotion stir within him. He reached out and slowly traced his fingers upward from the base of the spine. Wu Shi Xian shuddered violently when Teng Mo's fingertips touched his skin, yet he neither flinched nor struggled further, as if he had resigned himself to an inescapable fate. Teng Mo's touch was light and gentle. The contact between his fingertips and the skin seemed to spark tiny electric currents, traveling from the spine to the small of the back, sweeping up over the ribs, and sending shivers all the way to the protruding shoulder blades. Wu Shi Xian's waist was slender, and his skin was unexpectedly smooth, possessing a softness that belied his cold, tough exterior. The man trembled slightly beneath his palm, his long, soaked hair spread in disarray across that fragile back, a sight that inexplicably stirred a deep sense of tenderness in Teng Mo, gathering the wet strands and letting them drape over Wu Shi Xian's shoulder. Teng Mo used the movement to slide his hand up to the man's neck. His fingers, seemingly unable to stop, continued upward to trace that sharp, defined jawline. After a long while, Wu Shi Xian finally gathered enough strength to prop himself up slightly and turn his head. His chin came to rest in Teng Mo's palm. Teng Mo, snap out of it. Look closely and see who I am. I can't snap out of it. Teng Mo gazed at him with an indescribable tenderness. Wu Shi Xian was momentarily stunned as Teng Mo smiled at him. Just pretend this is a dream. When you wake up tomorrow, we'll go our separate ways, bridge to bridge, road to road. There was something in that smile that Wu Shi Xian couldn't decipher. Not the joy of a scheme succeeding, nor the elation of triumph, but a sense of self-loathing. It was like the final smile left behind by someone standing on the edge of a cliff. Before Wu Shi Xian could fully process this, Teng Mo gripped his shoulders and thrust deeply, jolting Wu Shi Xian's body forward. Then came a storm-like onslaught of thrusts. Teng Mo drove his hips with reckless abandon, plunging deep again and again, forcing cries of distress from Wu Shi Xian. Yet Teng Mo knew it wasn't pain. The tight passage was contracting violently, spasming in waves, clamoring to pull him deeper inside. Teng Mo no longer cared about anything. Sin, morality, ethics, to hell with it all. He had lived a life of ascetic restraint for 5 years. He never imagined he would finally lose his composure over a man. Yes, perhaps they didn't know each other well. Perhaps this was merely a tryst born of lust. Perhaps it was destined to be a fleeting encounter with no future. But what did that matter? This man's body was exquisite. That tight, narrow passage was searingly hot. Even if the world were to end the very next second, with the heavens collapsing and the oceans surging in this moment, he wanted nothing more than to bury himself deep within this man's body and see this dream through to the end. Chapter 17. Ancestor, if you keep this up, I'll have to take some meds. Teng Mo. Tongue. Too deep. It's too deep. Wu Shi Xian's tongue was tied, his words slurred and indistinct. He was completely overwhelmed by Teng Mo's thrusts. His body was practically collapsing into the bathtub, his legs devoid of strength, sliding down only to be hauled back up by Teng Mo to be fucked all over again. His eyes were watering. He didn't want to admit they were tears brought on by the fucking, but right now, that hardly mattered. Soaking wet from head to toe, it was impossible to distinguish between the bathwater and their bodily fluids. Teng Mo held Wu Shi Xian by the waist, his eyes flushed red and his breath coming in ragged gasps as he thrust with a force that felt like it could crush the other man. Since opening the shop, he had seen countless gay men coming in late at night to buy adult products. Yet he had never imagined that he, too, would one day become so obsessed with a man's ass. How could it feel this good? Every time he pulled out, the intestinal walls seemed to writhe with a life of their own, wrapping around him in layers, clinging and biting at him so tightly that his lower abdomen spasmed. He wanted nothing more than to thrust harder and more ruthlessly, to smooth out every fold and crease, to fuck this man until he turned into a puddle of soft, boneless mush. The sensation was intoxicating, enough to make a man lose his reason. For the past 5 years, he had holed up in this shady little shop, living like an old man who had renounced the world, staying up late smoking and gaming, yet keeping a thermos of Codenopsis and goji berry tea by his side. He had thought he had achieved a state of zen, able to view everything and everyone with calm detachment. But it turned out he wasn't as detached as he had believed. He couldn't tell, and didn't want to think about, whether this sudden, overwhelming urge was sparked by Wu Shi Xian the person or simply by this magnificent body. All that filled his mind now was the sight of the man before him, that flushed face and those tear-filled eyes. He only wanted to keep thrusting into him, deeper and deeper still. Wu Shi Xian trembled as he took it. He was like a fish on a cutting board, or a small beast caught in a trap, quivering pitifully and helplessly. The depths of his insides were ground against without mercy, a sensation so intense it made his very bones and flesh go weak, causing his rear to spasm and clench uncontrollably. Caught off guard, Teng Mo felt himself suddenly gripped by a powerful suction that threatened to melt him. He ejaculated unexpectedly, a wild, senseless, and sudden release that left even him dazed. It took a moment for the realization to hit. He had surrendered his load after barely any time at all, just like some inexperienced kid with premature ejaculation. How embarrassing. It was a disgrace to his status as the owner of an adult goods shop. Teng Mo tried to thrust a couple more times in frustration, but biology was against him. Having ejaculated, he had gone soft. After just a few movements, he was squeezed right out of Wu Shi Xian. Opaque white semen was squeezed out along with him, clinging to that flushed red opening and slowly trickling down. Teng Mo licked his lips. The scene was incredibly lewd, a sight that was visually overwhelming. Better clean the kid up, he thought. He quickly scooped up some water and splashed it over Wu Shi Xian's buttocks, then splashed another handful, actually washing him off a bit in the process. When he looked up, he found Wu Shi Xian gazing back at him in a daze. His face still bore the flush of passion, eyes misty and glistening, blue lips slightly parted, and the tip of his crimson tongue peeking out. Only then did it occur to Teng Mo that while he had finished, Wu Shi Xian hadn't. That cock of his, hard enough to shatter glass, was still standing at attention. "Ah, sorry, I'll help you right away." The frenzy of the moment had passed. Though his heart was still racing, Teng Mo had regained his usual calm, unhurried composure. He turned Wu Shi Xian over and seated him on the bath stool at the bottom of the tub, then lowered the water level slightly. Next, he squeezed a generous dollop of lubricant into his hand, grasped that hard, hot member, and began to stroke him. Teng Mo was skilled and knew exactly where a man's sensitive spots were. Soon, Wu Shi Xian was trembling under his touch. His legs shook uncontrollably, his lower abdomen visibly tightened, his muscles went rigid, and his chest heaved rapidly. He was on the verge of climaxing. Teng Mo felt a surge of excitement and stroked even more vigorously. Wu Shi Xian began to whimper, his hips arching and swaying. He panted with his mouth open, writhing in unbearable need and instinctively pressing himself into Teng Mo's hand. That erect, massive member had turned a deep, engorged purple red, and a significant amount of prostatic fluid was leaking from the tip, making it slick and wet. Every sign indicated he was about to come. Yet, 20 minutes later, the look on Teng Mo's face had shifted from initial excitement to sheer indifference. After such a long, repetitive motion, his hand was sore and aching, but Wu Shi Xian simply wouldn't climax. Teng Mo could sense, however, that the man desperately wanted to come. It was like climbing a towering mountain, a long, exhausting trek that left one drained and longing only to reach the summit and rest. Yet, despite being just one step away, that final step remained stubbornly out of reach. It might have been the effect of the drugs, or perhaps Teng Mo had stimulated him too intensely earlier. Either way, The result was exactly what Wu Shi Xian had predicted when he first entered the shop. He couldn't get it out. Wu Shi Xian's eyes were misty, and he gasped for air through his open mouth. His expression was one of agony, his face etched with the struggle of an insatiable, unfulfilled desire. Although he said nothing, his legs kept brushing against Teng Mo, whether intentionally or not. Teng Mo sighed. He knew the man had developed a craving for the sensation. Having failed to climax from the front, Wu Shi Xian now wanted to try from behind. Unfortunately, age had caught up with him. He couldn't perform like a young buck capable of going 7 rounds a night. Having just ejaculated, he had entered his refractory period and wouldn't be getting hard again anytime soon. My dear ancestor, if you don't come soon, I'm going to have to take some pills. Teng Mo's hand was so sore he had to switch to the other one. After being teased for so long, it wasn't as if Wu Shi Xian felt nothing. Far from it, but he was constantly stuck on the verge of release. That final push remained just out of reach, leaving the sensation suspended in his throat, neither rising nor falling. He felt like he was about to explode from the tension. The desperate need to climax was driving him mad. It felt as though countless termites were gnawing at his entire body, an agony that pushed him to the brink of collapse. If this were a way to die, it would be excruciating. His eyes were brimming with tears of arousal, blurring the figure before him until he could barely make out the outline. Yet, he knew this person was the only one who could save him now. Clutching at Teng Mo's arm with a desperate grip, he held on as if grasping at a final lifeline while facing death. It was a dream, wasn't it? He had heard someone say so earlier, that this was all a dream. Since it was a dream, could he perhaps stop being so strong? It was only a dream. He would wake up tomorrow. The sky in this dream didn't need him to hold it up. Why not let himself indulge just this once? Why not be weak for a moment? The agony was simply too much to bear. When he woke up tomorrow, he could go back to being the dependable man who shouldered the full weight of life. Teng Mo, save me. The words escaped him in a trembling voice, words he would never have uttered in his waking life. He had no idea what kind of expression he wore as he said them. Teng Mo, however, saw it all with perfect clarity. That face, once so resolute and coolly aloof on stage, now revealed an expression of such vulnerability and allure. The glistening tears, the soft lips, and that admission of surrender. It was like an iron tree blooming or a rough stone cracking open to reveal a heart of jade. It was impossible not to be moved. It felt as if a firework had suddenly exploded inside his heart with a loud pop, so brilliant, so dazzling, sending a surge of heat racing through his blood. This is going to be the death of me, Teng Mo muttered. Miraculously, he was hard again. Chapter 18. A First Kiss at 20. Teng Mo was far more vigorous this second time around. He did not climax as quickly, and his confidence grew, allowing him to thrust with bold, sweeping strokes. His flesh blade parted the constricted entrance and forced its way into that passage, a channel so hot it felt like it would melt a person. Wu Shi Xian's legs were propped up on the sides of the bathtub, with only the very edge of his buttocks resting on the bath stool. Teng Mo braced his hands against the wall behind Wu Shi Xian, thrusting his hips in a dominant, imposing posture. He hadn't expected to feel such youthful passion for this act. Despite having just finished a round, the moment he thrust inside, the blood rushed to his head, and he was overcome with excitement. It wasn't that he didn't feel tired. He simply never even considered stopping. Wu Shi Xian clutched Teng Mo's arms in a panic. The position, legs spread wide, made him feel deeply ashamed, especially being entered from the front. The intense shame briefly eclipsed his physical desire, and he tried to push Teng Mo away, but a single deep thrust from Teng Mo made his waist go limp. For some reason, this position was different from being entered from behind. Every time Teng Mo thrust deep, he precisely struck that ultra-sensitive spot deep within the bowel, the very place Wu Shi Xian was most afraid of having touched. Whenever Teng Mo ground against that point, Wu Shi Xian felt as though he were on the verge of losing control of his bladder. He would instantly lose command over his body, his limbs trembling as if they no longer belonged to him. Seeing Wu Shi Xian's reaction, Teng Mo knew he'd done a pretty good job. He slicked back his sweat-dampened hair, a hint of smug satisfaction playing across his features. Feels amazing, doesn't it? Wu Shi Xian felt like he'd lost his mind. For a split second, he'd inexplicably thought the guy's uninhibited, bold grin looked kind of handsome. He snapped out of it quickly, though, feeling ashamed of the thought. As if to cover it up, he cursed, though his voice lacked conviction. Get lost. Teng Mo didn't get angry. He just slowed his pace slightly and asked in that same gentle tone, "Do you know why this position feels so good to you?" Wu Shi Xian found the guy incredibly annoying. Being buggered by a man was humiliating enough. It was a miracle he hadn't killed the guy to silence him. Yet here he was, pestering him with questions that no decent person would ever ask. Who would actually answer something like that? Seeing Wu Shi Xian biting his lip and staying silent, Teng Mo gave a little thrust, as if to urge him on. "Tell me, do you want to know?" The thrust made Wu Shi Xian gasp sharply. Furious and flustered, he turned his face away. No. Teng Mo found the guy a little adorable. With his wet eyelashes and flushed face, even his angry glare looked incredibly arousing and seductive, all while he thought he was acting like some cool, tough guy. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he deliberately ground against that spot a couple more times, sending shivers through Wu Shi Xian, so intense his toes curled, before drawling out, "Oh, so you really don't want to know?" Wu Shi Xian worried he might do it again. The sensation of being ground against that specific spot was so intense it made his vision go dark, a pleasure so overwhelming it was almost frightening. He shrank back slightly and cursed defiantly. "You fucker, spit it out if you're going to, or get lost." "Haha," Teng Mo chuckled. He pressed the backs of Wu Shi Xian's knees down while slowly thrusting his hips, letting him feel the sensation fully, and then went along with the opening Wu Shi Xian had given him. "It's mostly thanks to my parents. Mine might not be a monster-sized cock, but it's got a great shape. You know what they call a head that curves upward like mine?" Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth, resignedly playing along. "What do they call it?" "A little scimitar." Teng Mo perked up as he said it, his eyes brightening. "Did you know that back in the day, a jade-like cock with this shape was called the scimitar young master? With the position we're in now, that little scimitar head hits your prostate dead on. The friction area and the angle are on a whole different level compared to a straight-shafted dick." "Enough." Wu Shi Xian rolled his eyes in exasperation. Who wanted a sex ed lesson right now? Wasn't he just trying to make up for his size? Besides, did the shape really matter? Just getting the job done was what counted. Teng Mo, however, wasn't quite finished yet. "Do you want to touch it?" Wu Shi Xian remained motionless, his face cold. What a freak, he thought. Who the hell wants to touch another man's cock? Isn't that gross? Yet, when Teng Mo pulled his hand down, he didn't pull away, though he couldn't quite explain the impulse behind it. Teng Mo didn't pull all the way out. The head of his little scimitar remained sheathed inside. He guided Wu Shi Xian's hand to the point of their union, letting him feel it. When his fingertips brushed against that thing, Wu Shi Xian shuddered slightly. It was hot and hard, feeling slick and viscous, perhaps from lubricant, or perhaps a mix of their bodily fluids. Tracing his hand upward, he felt his own opening, the folds stretched taut and distended. At that moment, Teng Mo nudged his way further inside. The sensation of another man's member entering his body was utterly mortifying, and the tips of Wu Shi Xian's ears flushed a deep red. Teng Mo held Wu Shi Xian's wrist, his breathing ragged. The man before him had his head slightly bowed, revealing long, delicate eyelashes and a high, straight nose bridge. His chin had a beautiful curve, his collarbones were exquisite, and his nipples were a soft pink, reminiscent of cherry blossoms blooming on a spring branch. Truly, a young and pristine body. Overcome by a sudden surge of desire, Teng Mo thrust his hips forward sharply. The jolt of sensation made Wu Shi Xian gasp, and Teng Mo seized the moment to cup his chin, forcing him to look up. Wu Shi Xian's eyes widened in bewilderment as he found himself on the receiving end of a sudden, unexpected kiss. A first kiss at 20. Chapter 19. For the love of God, have mercy on me. Teng Mo's kiss was clean and pure, with an innocence that belied his age, as he reverently adored a flower. There was no trace of mischief or calculated technique, just a simple meeting of lips that lingered for a few seconds, perhaps a little longer, before parting. Wu Shi Xian's eyes remained wide open in a daze, as if he hadn't yet grasped what had just happened. Teng Mo thought to himself that the guy's reaction was incredibly green. Nothing like someone who took 5 Viagra pills a week. Where on earth did he channel all that energy? It wasn't until Wu Shi Xian saw the faint trace of royal blue on Teng Mo's lips that he realized he had just been kissed. With a delayed reaction, he gave Teng Mo a shove. "What are you doing?" Teng Mo, however, remained uncharacteristically silent. There was no earnest explanation, no casual banter, and no attempt to deflect or cover up his actions. He simply entered him in silence, thrusting with silent intensity, slamming deep inside, and rocking him violently, stroke after stroke. The words of protest on the tip of Wu Shi Xian's tongue were shattered into broken, incoherent sounds by the jarring motion. He looked at Teng Mo with something bordering on alarm. The man's eyes burned with a feverish intensity rarely seen in adults. Every thrust was delivered with such force and devotion that the little curved blade scraped repeatedly against his sensitive, vulnerable prostate, driving him to the brink of trembling madness. Wu Shi Xian felt as though he were being shaken apart. His bones seemed on the verge of shattering, and the violent jolting made tears stream uncontrollably from his eyes. He could only cling helplessly to Teng Mo's arm, holding on to the last shred of his wavering sanity as he gasped, "Slow down." Teng Mo, however, seemed not to hear him. He drove himself in hard and deep, thrusting until the man beneath him trembled and moaned, until he wept and spasmed, yet clung to him tightly, like a puppy terrified of being abandoned. His consciousness began to blur, and his mind went blank. Under Teng Mo's relentless, unbridled grinding, Wu Shi Xian gradually lost all control. An overwhelming, dizzying pleasure surged through every cell of his body like a tidal wave. He might have cried out or sobbed. He couldn't tell, nor did he care to remember. He had been walking a long, agonizing path, desperate for someone to pull him away from that endless road. Then Teng Mo appeared and swept him straight up to the clouds. He would likely never forget the moment of his climax. The pleasure was terrifyingly intense, soul-shattering, and bone-melting. It must have felt just like the rush of a drug hitting the bloodstream. The sensation of having his prostate rubbed while he was ejaculating made him lose all sense of time and place. He wanted nothing more than to sink into that sweet vortex forever and never wake up. Teng Mo nearly climaxed along with him, as Wu Shi Xian's internal muscles were contracting and spasming violently. The high-frequency tremors and suction sent shivers racing across his scalp, making it incredibly difficult to hold back. Yet, in the end, Teng Mo couldn't bring himself to release. This was his first time making a man ejaculate while inside him. Although he had seen it in films, witnessing it firsthand was truly staggering. With every thrust, a thick jet of semen spurted from Wu Shi Xian, burst after burst, pulsing and spraying outward without the organ going limp. The kid really had a natural gift for this. He managed to climax via anal stimulation on his very first try, without his front being touched at all. He possessed a truly exquisite, innate constitution. One had to wonder, though, if that Indian miracle drug played a part in it. Wu Shi Xian was dizzy with sensation, drifting like a lone duckweed leaf on the surging waves of desire. Every time Teng Mo thrust upward, he would moan and whimper. Hearing those sounds made Teng Mo's knees go weak. He nearly climaxed again and had to slow his pace to catch his breath, asking with a hint of smug pride, "So, is little scimitar impressive, or what?" In his daze, Wu Shi Xian sensed Teng Mo slacking off. Half opening his teary, flushed eyes, he grumbled with a hint of dissatisfaction. "Again." Teng Mo was shocked. "Again? Didn't you just come?" Wu Shi Xian draped his limp arms around Teng Mo's neck, pressing his body close. He rubbed his still hard member, slick with thick, viscous fluids, against Teng Mo's belly. "Don't stop. Wait, you." Teng Mo hadn't expected Wu Shi Xian to let go of all inhibitions like this once the floodgates were open. That rock-hard, hot shaft, dripping with sticky residue, was jabbing insistently at his stomach, making him stammer incoherently. "Hold on a sec." Wu Shi Xian had no intention of waiting. He didn't want to come down from Cloud 9 just yet. "Move faster," Teng Mo muttered plaintively. "If I move any faster, I'm going to come." He reflected that even in his own 20s, he hadn't possessed such tireless stamina. Wu Shi Xian's tone turned fierce, a touch of the arrogance that comes from being doted upon. Faster. The blue peacock bowed its proud head. The lone wolf exposed its soft underbelly. Who could possibly resist that? Teng Mo gritted his teeth and thrust in and out rapidly a few times. The urge to ejaculate grew increasingly intense, forcing him to stop in a panic. My dear ancestor, have mercy on me. How about I go get a vibrator? Or a bullet vibe? Which one do you prefer? Wu Shi Xian wrapped his arms around Teng Mo's neck, acting like a spoiled child. No, I don't want a vibrator. I just want you. His hot breath washed over the shell of Teng Mo's ear, sending shivers down Teng Mo's spine and making his heart race wildly. You really have a way of talking that acts just like an aphrodisiac, Teng Mo complained, even as his body honestly and vigorously resumed its thrusting. Although such unbridled indulgence wasn't exactly healthy, and went completely against his usual philosophy of conserving his vital energy, well, doing it once in a while wasn't the end of the world. After all, who could possibly resist an aphrodisiac like that? In the aftermath, Teng Mo had to drink ginseng soup for a full month before he felt he had replenished the vital essence lost that night. It was the most outrageous night of his 30 years of life, and the most irrational, reckless thing he had ever done. He had made love to a man in the bathroom over and over again, tirelessly, going soft only to harden once more. Like a young man, he went round after round, spending himself dry time and again. Even after collapsing into bed, exhausted, he would climb back up to continue, driving that proud blue peacock to climax again and again. He pinned the other man's hands down to enter him from behind, spreading his legs wide to possess him forcefully, listening to him weep, moan, and tremble beneath him. He had soiled the pristine bedsheets and broken a prized collectible figure, yet he hadn't been angry. Far from it. He had even held the other man while they slept, cradling him in the most intimate embrace, letting him nestle against his chest and rest his head on his arm. Wu Shi Xian didn't struggle. That lethal, demanding member of his had finally spent its last reserves and gone limp. He was utterly exhausted by the end of the night. He had cried until his voice was hoarse and couldn't expel a single drop more. Neither semen nor urine. There was nothing left, and nothing more would come out. When Teng Mo moved to hold him, he allowed it. He had no strength left to break free anyway. That chest felt so warm. He would just lean on it for a brief moment. Chapter 20. A Momentary Impulse. When Teng Mo woke around noon the next day, the spot beside him in bed was already empty. The sheets were cold to the touch. He sat there in a daze for a moment before getting up, pulling on his pajamas, and searching the apartment. It was only a small two-bedroom place with a living room. You could walk through the whole thing in a minute. The kid had already left, cleanly and decisively, without a word or even a note. Teng Mo ran a hand through his hair in frustration. What had gotten into him last night? Had he taken the wrong medication or been possessed? He'd already decided not to drag anyone else into his mess, hadn't he? So why had he made a move on that kid? Was it just a momentary impulse? Or had he been the one who'd been seduced? Who knew? It didn't matter anymore. It was over. He shuffled off to wash up. Halfway through brushing his teeth, he suddenly realized something. Why was the bathroom so clean? He vaguely remembered the two of them making a complete mess of it the night before, then collapsing into bed without the energy to clean anything up. Had Wu Shi Xian gotten up and tidied everything before leaving? He never would have guessed it. The kid was actually pretty domestic. Teng Mo looked at his reflection in the mirror. If he could turn back time 5 years, if he were still the man he'd been before that incident, he might have tried to hold on to Wu Shi Xian. Even if they were both men, even with an age gap large enough to be called a generation apart, he would have been willing to give it a try. But now, Teng Mo shook his head with a faint smile. Better to let it go. Brush his teeth. Wash his face. Change clothes. Eat. Open the pharmacy. Log into the game. Everything returned to normal. Everything followed the usual routine. The only difference was that at 9 that evening, Teng Mo didn't close the shop early, nor did he head to Blue Moon. They had agreed that once dawn came, they would go their separate ways. Even if, while gaming, he suddenly remembered that wild, absurd night, or Wu Shi Xian's face flashed through his mind while he soaked in the bathtub, it wouldn't change anything. In the end, it had only been an unexpected little interlude. life still had to go on. About a week passed in this hazy state. That evening, with a cigarette hanging from his lips, Teng Mo was busy navigating the safe zone in his game when the glass door of the shop swung open with a sharp click. He glanced over from the corner of his eye. One look was enough to freeze him in place. It was someone he'd thought he would never see again. Just like every time before, Wu Shi Xian stood in the doorway wearing his black leather jacket, dazzling royal blue lip gloss, and a guitar case slung over his shoulder. The familiar scent of decadent perfume drifted in with him. The difference was that this time, he didn't walk straight over, nor did he say a word. He simply stood there by the entrance, looking strangely guarded. One hand still rested on the glass door handle, as though he was ready to pull it shut and run away at any second. Teng Mo stared at him blankly for several seconds. He wanted to ask, "What brings you here?" Instead, what came out was, "Here to buy medicine?" Wu Shi Xian stood there expressionlessly for a moment before finally giving a quiet hum of acknowledgement. Teng Mo pushed aside his keyboard and mouse, took off his headset, and stood up, abandoning the game without a second thought. Viagra again. Not thinking about trying something else. For some reason, Wu Shi Xian's ears immediately turned red. He pressed his lips together and tightened his grip on the door handle. Afraid he might actually turn around and leave, Teng Mo hurriedly added, "Right. Got it. Same as usual. 450. Wu Shi Xian hesitated for another moment before finally releasing the handle and walking inside. He accepted the box of Viagra from Teng Mo and handed over the cash he'd already taken from his pocket. Throughout the exchange, the two of them shared a strange, unspoken understanding. As the medicine and the money changed hands, both of them carefully avoided letting their fingers touch. It was as though the two people who had once been so desperately entangled with each other weren't them at all. The transaction was finished, yet neither of them spoke. An awkward silence settled over them, so heavy that it felt as though they could hear each other's heartbeats. Finally, Wu Shi Xian moved first. He turned and headed for the door. Teng Mo wanted to call out to him, to say something, anything, but although he opened his mouth, no sound came. Wu Shi Xian deliberately slowed his steps. Even though the person behind him never called his name, he still stopped at the doorway and slowly turned back. Teng Mo hadn't returned to his game. He was still standing behind the counter, looking at Wu Shi Xian as though he'd been waiting for him to turn around. Their eyes met. Wu Shi Xian's heart pounded so hard it hurt. After hesitating again and again, he finally asked, "Why? Don't you come to Blue Moon anymore?" Teng Mo paused before answering. "Oh, didn't I tell you? As long as you kept taking that medicine, I wouldn't ask you to sing songs you hated for a few months." Wu Shi Xian looked at him. "You could still come for a drink, even if you don't request any songs." Teng Mo shook his head. "I don't actually like drinking that much." Wu Shi Xian gripped the strap of his guitar case tightly, his expression stiff. "Then, you could request normal songs." Teng Mo smiled faintly. "I thought you wouldn't want me there." Wu Shi Xian answered quickly, as though trying to hide something. "Blue Moon isn't mine. Whether I want you there or not doesn't matter. If you wanted to come, I couldn't stop you anyway." Teng Mo looked at him with quiet amusement. "So, are you saying you do want me to come?" Wu Shi Xian immediately took a step back, looking both embarrassed and defensive. His face went cold again. "Do whatever you want. I don't care." With that, he pulled the door open and strode away without another glance. Teng Mo smiled softly as he watched the retreating figure. Young men really were easy to read. Everything they felt was written plainly across their faces. The following evening, Teng Mo hesitated for a long time. He'd been restless since 7 o'clock, lingering until 10 before finally closing the shop and wandering toward the bar district. Blue Moon was as lively as ever. Wu Shi Xian was on stage, singing his dark rock music just as he always did. Teng Mo ordered a Long Island iced tea and settled into his usual seat at the bar. Wu Shi Xian noticed him with a single glance, but showed no reaction. His expression remained cold, treating the man seated at the bar like nothing more than another stranger. When the song ended, however, he stood up and exchanged a few words with the musicians beside him. A moment later, the keyboardist began playing a bright, melodic tune. The heavy metal atmosphere disappeared, replaced by a gentle, slow-tempo melody. The keyboardist announced that the next song was called "I Want to Tell You Something." Then Wu Shi Xian began to sing. His voice was astonishingly clear and moving. Amid the gentle melody, he sang, "I want to tell you something. April brings the finest weather. The wind blows from the northwest. The fallen leaves drift toward the south. Even strangers can feel a sense of closeness." It was as though a tiny crack had suddenly appeared in the tightly sealed door around Teng Mo's heart. Because the man on the stage was saying, "I want to tell you something. Now is the finest weather. Beneath April's sunshine. I don't need to search for you. Even as strangers can still feel a sense of closeness." Chapter 21. Alcohol, Viagra, and a lack of restraint. Lately, Teng Mo had been closing his shop at 9 o'clock and heading to Blue Moon. Wu Shi Xian wasn't there every day. He usually performed at the club 3 or 4 nights a week. Teng Mo no longer requested songs, but whenever Wu Shi Xian saw him arrive, he would change his set list and sing something gentle, sometimes the 10:30 p.m. subway, other times amidst the bustle. His voice was soft and moving, as though quietly saying, "You're here." Yet they never spoke. Teng Mo never walked over to talk to him, and Wu Shi Xian never stepped off the stage to approach him. They simply watched each other from afar, as though guarding a secret only the two of them shared. Most of the time, Teng Mo also left halfway through the night, never staying until the end of Wu Shi Xian's performance. Because Wu Shi Xian didn't just sing. He drank as well. Sometimes it was with men, sometimes with women. Patrons would tuck money into the drink menu and have a waiter deliver it to the stage. During breaks between sets, Wu Shi Xian would walk over and sit with them to drink. With his cold, distant expression, he looked strangely lonely sitting among the laughing, boisterous crowd. He rarely smiled or spoke much, but whenever someone handed him a drink, he never refused. Tilting his head back, he would empty the glass in a single swallow. The table would erupt in cheers and immediately pour him another. Wherever Wu Shi Xian sat, drinks sold exceptionally well. The owner must have been thrilled to have a resident singer like him. Yet every time Teng Mo watched him drink like that, his chest tightened. Alcohol, Viagra, and absolutely no restraint. At this rate, even a young body wouldn't last long. But Teng Mo had no right to say anything. He had neither the standing nor the reason to interfere. He couldn't help wondering what happened after the drinking. What did Wu Shi Xian do afterward? Did he simply leave with one of those patrons, go back to a hotel or someone's home, and spend the night with them? Was that the life he lived? Then why had he looked so pure and innocent that night? Had it all been an act? Or was that simply who he really was? The more Teng Mo thought about it, the more his head hurt. He didn't want to dwell on such troublesome questions, nor did he want to witness Wu Shi Xian leaving with someone else. After all, wasn't the whole point of coming to a bar to relax? So he rarely stayed until the end of the performance. Once he finished his Long Island iced tea, he tucked a tip beneath the glass and went home. Whenever Teng Mo decided to leave, he never looked back. Because of that, he never once saw Wu Shi Xian's gaze following him as he walked away. He had told himself countless times that he wouldn't come to Blue Moon again. Yet every night at 9 o'clock, he somehow found himself wandering toward the bar district. Living alone could be unbearably dull, and he had always enjoyed lively places. Besides, Blue Moon wasn't only about Wu Shi Xian. Bars were melting pots of fascinating human drama, adding a little excitement to his otherwise monotonous life. Tonight, for example, the place was in an uproar. A woman had arrived with a group of uncles and younger male relatives to confront her husband over his mistress. The husband happened to be there with several male friends and 2 young women. The moment the 2 groups spotted each other, insults started flying. Accusations of green tea homewreckers, complaints about the wife's overbearing family, claims that an innocent mistress had become pregnant and been forced into an abortion. The entire scene was a messy, sordid spectacle. Teng Mo found it far more entertaining than any television drama. The argument quickly escalated from shouting to shoving, then erupted into a full-scale fight. Tables and chairs were knocked over. The already intoxicated customers loved the excitement and had no intention of stopping the brawl. If anything, they cheered it on. The fight grew increasingly chaotic. People grabbed whatever they could find and used it as weapons. Glasses and ashtrays flew through the air. Teng Mo glanced toward the stage. Wu Shi Xian was still singing. After performing in nightlife venues for so long, he had long since grown accustomed to scenes like this. The chaos below didn't affect him in the slightest. Instead, he launched into superstar of troubled times. The moment the rhythm began, it carried the unmistakable atmosphere of young and dangerous, as though he were providing the soundtrack to the street fight unfolding below. The crowd gradually scattered, but a bartender who tried to break up the fight was dragged into the melee instead, making the scene even more chaotic. Under the dim bar lights, it looked like a wild dance of demons. Holding his drink, Teng Mo backed toward the stage to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Just as he found a safe place with a clear view, he noticed a short, buzz-cut man. Apparently furious after seeing one of his companions beaten up, the man grabbed a half-broken beer bottle from a nearby table and hurled it forward with all his strength. The intended target lunged forward to throw a punch, unintentionally dodging the bottle. Its jagged, razor-sharp edge now exposed, the broken bottle flew straight toward the stage. Before Teng Mo even had time to think, his body had already moved. The instant he saw the short man raise the bottle toward the stage, he had started running. His instincts were faster than his thoughts. "Shi Xian," the drummer suddenly shouted from behind. Wu Shi Xian looked up, just in time to see someone throw himself in front of him and reach out to catch something flying through the air. He instinctively squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them again, Teng Mo was standing in front of him. Teng Mo was breathing hard, still visibly shaken. Wu Shi Xian's gaze slowly dropped from Teng Mo's face to the shattered beer bottle at his feet, and then to the bright crimson drop of blood falling onto the stage. The music stopped. The drummer, bassist, and keyboardist all rushed over. The drummer had seen everything clearly. A beer bottle had come flying out of nowhere, headed straight for Wu Shi Xian's face. If Teng Mo hadn't suddenly rushed over to stop it, Wu Shi Xian might have been permanently disfigured. Only after seeing the shattered bottle did Wu Shi Xian fully understand what had happened. He looked at Teng Mo in stunned disbelief. Just moments ago, Teng Mo had been standing by the bar. How had he suddenly appeared in front of him? "Be careful," Teng Mo said between breaths, glancing at Wu Shi Xian. He had rushed over so desperately that his heart was still pounding. Wu Shi Xian paused before quietly asking, "Are you okay?" As he spoke, he pointed at Teng Mo's hand. "I'm fine." Teng Mo shook his head. At that moment, the owner rushed over with several security guards carrying electric batons, quickly separating the two sides. What followed was the usual routine of mediation, calming everyone down, cleaning up the mess, and assessing the damage. Seeing that the owner had taken control and that no more fighting was likely to break out, Teng Mo turned to leave. Wu Shi Xian called after him. Whether because it was too noisy or for some other reason, Teng Mo never looked back. He simply walked out of the bar. Back at the pharmacy, Teng Mo disinfected the cut on his hand with alcohol and applied some medicine. Not long afterward, he heard the glass door open. Looking up, he saw Wu Shi Xian walk in. As always, Teng Mo asked calmly, "5 pills again?" Wu Shi Xian hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah." Teng Mo got the medicine and accepted the payment. After taking the box, Wu Shi Xian didn't leave right away. His eyes remained fixed on Teng Mo's bandaged hand for a long time before he quietly said, "Thank you. For today." "It was nothing," Teng Mo replied gently. "Just a small favor." Silence followed. There were countless questions they wanted to ask and countless things they could have said. Teng Mo was normally outgoing and talkative, yet whenever the two of them met, words seemed to disappear. Wu Shi Xian stood there quietly for a while longer. Seeing that Teng Mo had no intention of speaking, he finally tightened his grip on the medicine box and turned to leave. "Hey!" Unable to stop himself, Teng Mo called out. Wu Shi Xian stopped and turned around, silently waiting for him to continue. After hesitating for a moment, Teng Mo finally said, "I don't mean to interfere, but you really shouldn't keep taking so much Viagra. It's going to ruin your health." Wu Shi Xian's eyes reddened slightly. He bit his lower lip. After a long silence, he softly said, "It's not what you think. Not what I think." Teng Mo wanted to ask what he meant, but Wu Shi Xian had already opened the door and walked out. Chapter 22. Struck by how handsome he was. Because his hand was bandaged and difficult to use, Teng Mo hadn't played many video games over the past few days. With nothing better to do, he sat in his shop drinking tea, occasionally raising his bandaged hand beneath the incandescent light to examine it. It had been an impulsive decision, far too impulsive. What had gotten into him? That wasn't like him at all. At 30 years old, He shouldn't have been so hot-headed. But in that moment, there hadn't been time to think. Even if it hadn't been Wu Shi Xian, if it had been anyone else, he probably would have rushed over to help anyway, right? He would have, wouldn't he? Right? Would he? Oh well. The important thing was that Wu Shi Xian was safe. Teng Mo had assumed that after an incident like that, the bar would have to close for a few days to deal with the aftermath, giving him a chance to cool off as well. To his surprise, however, the bar was clearly experienced with handling situations like this. By the very next evening, everything had been cleaned up and business had returned to normal. Teng Mo stayed cooped up in his shop for several days, unable to go anywhere. In the end, though, he couldn't stop himself. By the weekend, he had already removed the bandages. Although the wound hadn't fully healed, he still closed up early and headed for the bar district. Blue Moon was even livelier than usual that weekend. Teng Mo sat in his usual seat and ordered a Long Island iced tea. When he reached for his wallet, however, the bartender smiled. No need. Someone already paid for it. Teng Mo blinked in surprise. He had only just arrived. Had his luck with romance suddenly become that good? This one's on me. The voice came from behind him. Turning around, Teng Mo saw Wu Shi Xian standing there with his hair tied in a high ponytail. Combined with his blue lipstick, he looked cool, distant, and strikingly handsome. Wu Shi Xian walked over to the bar. His face remained expressionless, but there was unmistakable warmth in his eyes. After hesitating for a moment, he finally asked, "How's your hand?" Smiling, Teng Mo held out his palm. "It's basically healed. I'm fine now." Wu Shi Xian lowered his gaze to the scab that still clung to the lines of Teng Mo's palm. Just as he was about to say something, a loud shout interrupted him. "Hey, you, Smuff, are you going to keep singing or not?" Following Wu Shi Xian's gaze, Teng Mo noticed a group of rough-looking men sitting at the table directly in front of the stage. The man in the center was obviously their leader. He radiated the swagger of a seasoned thug, wearing a suit with the sleeves rolled up to reveal a heavily tattooed arm. Even from this distance, the thick gold chain around his neck was impossible to miss. Wu Shi Xian looked back at Teng Mo awkwardly. After a brief hesitation, he said uncomfortably, "I should go over there." Sure." Teng Mo felt uneasy as well, though he couldn't quite explain why. The moment Wu Shi Xian stepped onto the stage and began singing, the crowd exploded into cheers and applause. Even customers who had no idea what was going on joined in, making the atmosphere far more energetic than usual. As soon as the song ended, the group immediately sent 2 bottles of liquor onto the stage. A curly-haired man wearing a flashy patterned shirt beneath his suit stood up and challenged Wu Shi Xian to finish both bottles in one go. There was no refusing drinks that had been sent to the stage. After emptying the first 2 bottles, Wu Shi Xian barely had time to catch his breath before the leader sent up another pair. Holding the bottles, Wu Shi Xian looked down at the audience. The leader tilted his chin upward, raised his own bottle, and drained it in a single gulp. The green dragon tattoo winding around his arm looked especially intimidating. Suppressing the urge to vomit as the alcohol churned in his stomach, Wu Shi Xian took a deep breath, raised his bottle, and drank it dry as well. When he finished the 4th bottle, the crowd erupted into deafening cheers. Only Teng Mo watched with a deep frown. From then on, after every song Wu Shi Xian performed, the group sent up more liquor. Bottle after bottle disappeared down his throat. Teng Mo's expression grew darker with every passing minute. He finished his Long Island iced tea in one gulp. When the bartender came over to refill his glass, Teng Mo asked, "What's with the table in the middle? At this rate, someone's going to drink himself to death." The bartender sighed. "They've been doing this for days. They've been coming here every night lately, and it's always the same. There's nothing we can do. It's easy to deal with the king of hell, but the little demons are the real problem. We're running a business. If we offend people like them, we'll have endless trouble afterward." After finishing his 3rd song, Wu Shi Xian had already emptied 10 bottles of liquor with ease. Seeing him set down his guitar and head toward the restroom, Teng Mo immediately got up and followed him. A bar restroom served far more purposes than simply using the toilet. People came to touch up their makeup, flirt, or even do things that couldn't be mentioned in public. As a result, they were usually spacious, luxurious, and kept meticulously clean by the staff. The moment Teng Mo pushed open the door, he saw Wu Shi Xian bent over the sink. vomiting violently. Since there was nothing in his stomach except alcohol, all that came up was water and bitter bile. Teng Mo quietly took out a few tissues and waited nearby. When Wu Shi Xian finally finished and raised his head, he saw Teng Mo's reflection in the mirror. Teng Mo handed him the tissues, sounding both concerned and slightly reproachful. I thought you had an incredible tolerance for alcohol. Without saying a word, Wu Shi Xian accepted the tissues and wiped his mouth. If you keep drinking like that, you'll destroy your stomach, Teng Mo said, looking at Wu Shi Xian's pale face with genuine concern. No matter how healthy you are, your body can't handle that. None of your business, Wu Shi Xian muttered. Without even looking at Teng Mo, he brushed past him and walked out. Teng Mo remained in the restroom for another moment. He splashed cold water onto his face, trying to wash away the frustration and heaviness building in his chest, before finally opening the door and stepping outside. The instant he came out, he heard whistles and thunderous applause. Looking toward the stage, he saw Wu Shi Xian already chugging yet another bottle. Teng Mo stood silently in the shadows beside the stage for a moment. Then, instead of returning to his seat at the bar, he walked straight toward the stage. Just as Wu Shi Xian set one empty bottle at his feet and reached for another, someone grabbed it first. He looked up. It was Teng Mo. The bottle was now in Teng Mo's hand. Fuck! What the hell are you doing? The curly-haired man immediately shouted, jumping to his feet. Teng Mo smiled apologetically. Big brother, let me drink this one for him. Who the fuck are you? What's it got to do with you? The curly-haired man raised an eyebrow and cursed, the stench of alcohol pouring from his mouth. Get lost. Still smiling, Teng Mo stepped in front of Wu Shi Xian protectively. Big brother, he really can't drink anymore. If he keeps going, he could die. Hey, who the fuck do you think you are, you old loser? The curly-haired man grabbed Teng Mo by the collar and raised his fist threateningly. If you don't get the fuck out of here right now, I'll... Crack. A sharp crash echoed through the bar. It wasn't the curly-haired man's fist hitting Teng Mo. It was Wu Shi Xian smashing a beer bottle directly over the man's head. Glass shards flew everywhere. For a brief moment, everyone froze. Even the curly-haired man himself stood there in shock, forgetting to throw the punch. Teng Mo slowly turned toward Wu Shi Xian, his face full of disbelief. What are you doing? Wu Shi Xian didn't even look at him. Holding the jagged neck of the broken bottle, he pointed it coldly at the curly-haired man. Let go. Teng Mo stared blankly into those sharp, icy eyes. Holy shit. What is this? I think I just got completely charmed by a kid. Chapter 23. You got the short end of the stick, huh? Does it hurt? As it turned out, showing off didn't always have a cool ending. The curly-haired guy let out a miserable howl, clutching his head. Realizing what had happened, the gangsters instantly flew into a rage. Someone had actually dared to provoke them in public. How could they tolerate that? Except for the tattooed man sitting calmly in the middle, everyone else jumped to their feet and surrounded them. Teng Mo immediately pulled Wu Shi Xian behind him and forced a smile. Brothers, it's all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Calm down. But the gangsters were drunk, and one of their own had been injured. Who could stay calm? Who was interested in talking things through? Without another word, fists and kicks came flying. Wu Shi Xian had clearly endured enough over the past few days and had finally reached his limit. He smashed the broken beer bottle onto the ground, shoved Teng Mo aside, and charged forward with his fists clenched. Teng Mo couldn't stop him. Instead, he got shoved around in the chaos and took several blows himself, groaning in pain. What was going on? He'd only come here a few times and had already ended up bruised twice. Bars really weren't meant for old people. Fortunately, Wu Shi Xian worked at the bar. Seeing the commotion, the band members, bartenders, and servers all rushed over. A crowd quickly formed around them, pulling people apart and shoving others back until it became impossible to tell whose arms and legs belonged to whom. Amid the chaos, Teng Mo spotted an opening, grabbed Wu Shi Xian by the wrist, and shouted, "Let's go. Stop fighting." Wu Shi Xian was still trying to kick at someone, balancing awkwardly on one foot, but Teng Mo dragged him along anyway. Several of the drunken toughs stumbled through the crowd, waving their arms, throwing wild kicks, and yelling at the top of their lungs. Then a heavily tattooed arm reached into the mass of people and yanked one of the pompadour-haired men back by the collar. "What the hell are you idiots doing? They've already run off." Only then did they notice that the Smuff had already sprinted toward the bar's entrance. By the time they rushed over, he had already turned the corner and disappeared. Cursing loudly, they shoved past the bartenders and waiters and gave chase. Meanwhile, Teng Mo had already dragged Wu Shi Xian out of the bar, and the two of them ran as fast as they could. They kept running until their stomachs churned, and they had no idea how far they'd gone. Only after making sure no one was following did Teng Mo stop, leaning against a wall and coughing. The moment they stopped, Wu Shi Xian bent over against the wall and threw up. His stomach was probably still reeling from all the alcohol he'd been forced to drink. Panting heavily, Teng Mo gently rubbed Wu Shi Xian's back to help him catch his breath. "You okay?" After retching for quite a while, Wu Shi Xian finally had nothing left to throw up. He took the tissue Teng Mo handed him and wiped his mouth roughly. When he raised his head, the glow of a nearby street lamp revealed his injuries. There was a bruise on his brow, one cheek was swollen, and his lip had split open. He had clearly taken quite a beating. Teng Mo pulled out another clean tissue and carefully dabbed at the blood on Wu Shi Xian's lip. "You really got the short end of the stick, huh? Why did you have to be so impulsive?" Wu Shi Xian glared at him, slapped his hand away, stuffed his own hands into his pockets, and lowered his head as he continued walking. Teng Mo hurried after him, craning his neck to study his expression. "Does it hurt? How about we find a pharmacy and get you some medicine?" "No need," Wu Shi Xian muttered. They walked side by side for a while before Teng Mo spoke again. "You know, there was actually a better way to deal with those guys. Street thugs like that. You've got to stroke their egos a little. Think about it. Sure, you got the satisfaction of hitting them, but dealing with the aftermath is a real headache. Your boss is definitely going to dock your pay, right? And since you sing at the bar, well, the monk can run away, but the temple stays put. They could come back every day and wait for you there." Halfway through his lecture, Wu Shi Xian suddenly stopped. Teng Mo turned around and saw Wu Shi Xian glaring at him coldly. "Stop following me." With that, he quickened his pace. Teng Mo jogged a few steps to catch up. All right. I'll stop talking. Don't get so worked up." Wu Shi Xian ignored him and walked even faster. Teng Mo had no intention of competing in a speed-walking contest in the middle of the night. His legs were already aching from the sprint earlier, so he simply reached out and grabbed Wu Shi Xian's arm. Wu Shi Xian turned around and glared at him fiercely, looking genuinely intimidating. "I really can't walk anymore," Teng Mo said, completely unfazed. He switched to an ingratiating, almost playful tone. "How about I treat you to something to eat?" He looked around. In the panic of escaping, he hadn't paid attention to where they were going, and now they were standing in some unfamiliar alley. There wasn't a single pedestrian or car in sight. Only a Today convenience store farther ahead still had its lights on. "I'm going to grab a few things from that convenience store. Don't wander off. Just wait for me here," Teng Mo said, speaking to Wu Shi Xian as though he were talking to a child. Wu Shi Xian neither nodded nor shook his head. He kept the same cold, sullen expression, but he did stop walking. As Teng Mo headed toward the store, he kept glancing back. Even after reaching the entrance, he turned for one last look. Wu Shi Xian was still standing beneath a large tree with his hands in his pockets, absent-mindedly kicking at pebbles. He looked exactly like a sulky middle school student. Not long afterward, Teng Mo hurried back out carrying a plastic bag. Afraid Wu Shi Xian might storm off while he was inside, he hadn't dared spend much time shopping. The moment he saw that tall, slender figure still waiting obediently beneath the tree, a warm feeling spread through his chest. "Here." Teng Mo took out cartons of yogurt and milk, along with some bread and cake. "The milk's warm. It'll be easier on your stomach if it's hurting. Or you can drink the yogurt instead. It should help too. Want some cake? You must be hungry." Wu Shi Xian shook his head and accepted only the yogurt. Teng Mo reached into the bag again and pulled something else out. As Wu Shi Xian took a sip of yogurt, he realized Teng Mo had unwrapped a Wong Wong ice pop. He stared at him in disbelief. "How old are you?" With a sharp snap, Teng Mo broke the rock-hard ice pop cleanly in half. 30. "Why? Does the wrapper say people over 10 aren't allowed to eat it?" Without a care, he stuffed one half into his own mouth and held out the other half. "Want some?" Wu Shi Xian gave him a look full of disdain. Childish. Yet 10 minutes later, beneath the dim glow of a late-night street lamp, Two grown men sat shoulder to shoulder on the curb of a narrow alley, sharing a Wong Wong ice pop like a pair of elementary school children. Your stomach isn't feeling well, so don't eat too much of something frozen. Teng Mo opened another one for himself. Wu Shi Xian let out a quiet snort and silently went back to drinking his yogurt. After a while, Teng Mo spoke again. So, what are your plans from here on? Huh? Wu Shi Xian looked at him in confusion. After everything that happened today, do you think the owner of Blue Moon will still let you sing there? And what if that tattooed guy comes back looking for trouble again? Wu Shi Xian bit down on the straw and stared at the tips of his shoes, his voice muffled. If they won't let me sing there, I'll just find another place. I've only been singing there for a few months anyway. It's about time to move on. That doesn't really solve the problem, Teng Mo said after thinking for a moment. If you leave after causing trouble, other bar owners might be hesitant to hire you. He paused before smiling. How about this? Leave it to me. I'll figure something out. Wu Shi Xian looked at him skeptically. What kind of solution could you possibly come up with? Don't worry about that. I'll handle it. Teng Mo flashed a sly, calculating smile. In the meantime, don't go back to Blue Moon for the next few days. Take a little break, then go back to work next week. Chapter 24. How much to book you for the night? It was 5 days before Wu Shi Xian returned to sing at Blue Moon. Everyone treated him as they always had. No one asked why he had taken time off, and the boss didn't make him cover the bar's lost revenue. However, after he had finished only 2 songs, the tattoo-armed big brother walked in with a few of his men and sat at the center table facing the stage. The moment Wu Shi Xian saw them, his nerves tightened, and his grip on the microphone unconsciously stiffened. Yet the tough-looking men showed no intention of settling old scores. They didn't mention rushing the stage or hacking him to pieces. Instead, they drank, played finger-guessing games, and laughed loudly among themselves, barely sparing Wu Shi Xian a glance. Wu Shi Xian continued singing, though unease lingered in his heart. Then he saw Teng Mo stroll into the bar. The moment Teng Mo stepped inside, he caught the questioning look Wu Shi Xian shot him from the stage. Smiling, he waved back, ordered a bottle of liquor at the bar, and carried it over to the table where the tough guys were sitting. Wu Shi Xian sang distractedly, his eyes fixed on Teng Mo. He watched Teng Mo set the bottle on the table and greet the group with practiced ease. The tattooed leader nodded, inviting him to sit. Teng Mo fetched several glasses and poured drinks for everyone. The leader clinked glasses with him, took a sip, and the two chatted quietly together as though they were old friends. When Wu Shi Xian finished the song, Teng Mo waved him over. After a brief hesitation, Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth, stepped off the stage, and walked over. Teng Mo stood up, slung an arm around Wu Shi Xian's shoulders, and raised his glass toward the group. Xiao Wu is my brother. I'll drink this glass on his behalf as an apology. I hope all you big brothers won't hold it against him. The tattooed man also stood, grabbed a bottle of beer, and shoved it toward Wu Shi Xian. Finished the whole bottle. Wu Shi Xian glanced at Teng Mo. Teng Mo gave a small nod. Without another word, Wu Shi Xian took the bottle and emptied it in one go. Watching him set the empty bottle back on the table, the tattooed man declared in his usual overbearing tone, "From now on, if anyone on this street gives you trouble, just tell them my name, Guan Jinghao." Wu Shi Xian stared blankly for a moment before looking at Teng Mo. Teng Mo smiled and nudged him lightly. "Thank Brother Hao. Thank you." Still dazed, Wu Shi Xian returned to the stage. He had no idea how Teng Mo had managed it. Maybe some kind of deal had been struck, but whatever the price, he couldn't imagine what Teng Mo had paid. Finally, the set ended, and it was time for a break. Wu Shi Xian stepped off the stage and headed straight for the bar. Teng Mo was chatting with the bartender. Seeing Wu Shi Xian approach, he smiled, handed him a bottle of mineral water, and thoughtfully twisted the cap open first. Wu Shi Xian ignored the water and immediately asked, "How did you deal with them?" "It's simple. Stay calm. People can always be reasoned with." I appealed to both emotion and logic, bought them a few bottles of liquor, and everything worked out. His tone was so casual that it was obvious he was glossing over the details. Wu Shi Xian looked at him with an expression that plainly said, "Do you really expect me to believe that?" Faced with Wu Shi Xian's unwavering stare, Teng Mo finally sighed in surrender. "Fine. I just put my professional expertise to use." Wu Shi Xian looked at him skeptically. What professional expertise? Did you forget what I do for a living? Don't you just run a shop? Exactly. And isn't my shop basically a men's refueling station? And Wu Shi Xian still looked confused. Teng Mo coughed softly, then crooked a finger for him to come closer. Puzzled, Wu Shi Xian leaned in. Teng Mo lowered his voice beside his ear. Every man has needs in that department. Big Brother is no exception. Just because he has a dragon tattooed on his arm doesn't mean he's a dragon in bed. Men are competitive about that sort of thing, so I simply catered to his preferences. The tips of Wu Shi Xian's ears turned red. How exactly did you cater to his preferences? You remember that Indian product from last time? The one you helped me test? It's powerful and long-lasting. I gave him a box. He had one of his underlings try it first, then tried it himself. The very next day, he came back wanting to become sworn brothers with me. Wu Shi Xian's mouth twitched. You can actually do something like that? Of course. Teng Mo leisurely took a sip of his Long Island iced tea. That's why I told you not to jump straight to violence whenever there's trouble. Use your brain. Fighting doesn't solve problems, it just creates more. Wu Shi Xian rolled his eyes and took an irritated gulp of his drink. Halfway through, another thought suddenly occurred to him. Wait, did you actually become sworn brothers with him? Not really. I'm not interested in that sort of thing. Being friends is enough. Just then, the drummer on stage tapped out a quick drum roll, signaling the start of the next set. Wu Shi Xian turned to tell Teng Mo he was going back, but Teng Mo suddenly asked, So, what time do you usually get off work? Wu Shi Xian looked at him in confusion. Around 11:30. Oh, Teng Mo nodded. Got it. You'd better get back up there. Later, while singing, Wu Shi Xian's gaze kept drifting toward the same corner of the bar. An older man sat there. Calm, rational, shrewd, cunning. Wu Shi Xian couldn't quite explain what made him so attractive, but every time that man looked at him and smiled, his heart beat faster. Before he knew it, it was already 11:30. Time for the final song. Yet when Wu Shi Xian glanced toward the bar again, he found Teng Mo's usual seat empty. The light in his eyes dimmed instantly. When Teng Mo had asked about his schedule earlier, Wu Shi Xian had secretly been looking forward to something. He had hoped that, just this once, Teng Mo wouldn't leave halfway through the performance before the last song ended. But nothing had changed. As the final drumbeat faded, Wu Shi Xian felt as though his heart had sunk with it. The laser lights above the stage went dark. Work was over. Everyone began packing up their instruments. Wu Shi Xian carried his microphone stand over to the drum kit. Seeing him, the drummer struck up a conversation. Shi Xian, you're pretty close with that guy, aren't you? Wu Shi Xian looked up. Huh? Which guy? The one who drank on your behalf that night. The one who always requested those weird songs. Wu Shi Xian paused. What about him? As he unplugged a cable, the drummer said casually, Oh, nothing much. You guys smashed a lot of stuff that night, didn't you? Normally the boss would have docked your pay for it. But Shouting told me that guy talked to the boss. He probably paid a huge amount in compensation. The boss came by a couple of days ago while you were away and said your wages wouldn't be deducted after all. I thought you already knew. Wu Shi Xian fell silent for a long moment. Yeah, I know. His mind wandered after that. The drummer said something else, but he didn't hear it. After everyone had left, Wu Shi Xian slowly packed up his things, slung his guitar over his back, and walked out through the rear door. Just as he turned to close it, a voice sounded behind him. Hi. Wu Shi Xian turned around. It was Teng Mo. His heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression cold. What are you doing hiding here? Teng Mo shot him a sideways look. Is that any way to greet someone? I was waiting for you. What for? Grinning, Teng Mo reached into his pocket and held something out. Here, have some candy. Brother Hao and the others gave it to me. Wu Shi Xian looked at the two colorful lollipops resting in Teng Mo's palm. Is it poisoned? You're actually willing to eat something they gave you. Without a care, Teng Mo picked one up and began unwrapping it. Then I'll test it for poison first. Once unwrapped, the lollipop resembled a colorful glass marble. Teng Mo put it into his mouth, bit down once, then again. He pulled it back out and examined it. Aside from a few faint tooth marks, it looked exactly the same. He turned it over in confusion. That's strange. Why isn't it lighting up? The pompadour-haired guy had clearly told him it would glow the moment someone bit it. Watching from the side, Wu Shi Xian finally lost patience. That's not how you bite it. Teng Mo held the lollipop up in front of him. Then how am I supposed to bite it? Wu Shi Xian looked at the candy hovering in front of his face. He didn't know what had possessed him. Maybe his brain had stopped working. Maybe he had completely lost his mind. Without thinking, he opened his mouth, took the lollipop between his lips, and bit down near the base of the candy, close to the stick. Instantly, the lollipop lit up. Brilliant colors shimmered inside it like a tiny disco ball beneath flashing lights. It was beautiful. Teng Mo froze, still holding the stick. He watched Wu Shi Xian take the candy into his mouth before letting it slip free again. Wu Shi Xian's lips were stained a rich royal blue. As they parted slightly, the bright red tip of his tongue flickered into view. That was the same lollipop Teng Mo had just bitten. And now Wu Shi Xian had put it into his own mouth. Did that count as an indirect kiss? Teng Mo's mind went completely blank. The moment Wu Shi Xian released the lollipop, he realized just how suggestive what he'd done looked. But he couldn't show it. That would only make things even more awkward. His cheeks flushed faintly as he forced himself to stay calm. You can't just bite the candy itself. You have to bite. Before he could finish, Teng Mo interrupted him. How much to book you for the night? Wu Shi Xian looked up. His eyes were filled with surprise, anger, and hurt. In the end, however, he merely pressed his lips together and answered indifferently. 5,000. Teng Mo hesitated. Never mind then. Wu Shi Xian lowered his head. After a long silence, he muttered softly. If it's you, 500 is fine. With the lollipop still in his mouth, Teng Mo asked, Can I get an even bigger discount? Wu Shi Xian's body trembled slightly. He turned to leave, only for Teng Mo to grab his arm tightly from behind. Bank transfer or cash? Chapter 25, Don't Let Dawn Come. Wu Shi Xian trailed behind Teng Mo, dragging his feet. When they reached the shop entrance, Teng Mo opened the door and stepped inside first. But Wu Shi Xian stopped at the threshold, peering cautiously into the room. Noticing that he hadn't followed, Teng Mo turned back and looked at him in confusion. Wu Shi Xian tightened his grip on the strap of his guitar case. After a long hesitation, he stammered. Maybe I should just. My shop doesn't sell regret pills, Teng Mo interrupted. You've already taken the money. Backing out now wouldn't be very fair, would it? Wu Shi Xian gritted his teeth. He wanted to argue, but in the end, he swallowed the words. Finally steeling himself, he stepped inside. Teng Mo quickly shut and locked the door behind him, as though afraid Wu Shi Xian might suddenly change his mind and run. When he turned around, he found Wu Shi Xian standing stiffly in the middle of the room. Come on. Teng Mo pushed open the door leading to the living quarters. Wu Shi Xian hesitated for a long time before awkwardly following him into the living room. After only a few steps, he stopped again, standing rigidly in the center of the room, clearly uncomfortable. At first, Teng Mo hadn't thought much of it. After all, the last time they had been together, they'd ended up tangled all over the apartment, from the bathroom to the living room to the bedroom. Yet somehow, Wu Shi Xian's unease rubbed off on him, leaving him inexplicably nervous as well. To break the awkward silence, Teng Mo opened the refrigerator, took out a carton of yogurt, handed it to Wu Shi Xian, and asked, Hungry? Want something to eat? Wu Shi Xian accepted the yogurt and shook his head expressionlessly. The two of them then stood in the middle of the living room, staring at each other for a full 3 minutes. Teng Mo helplessly raked a hand through his hair. He hadn't expected things to become like this. They had always interacted so naturally before, but now that they were alone together, everything suddenly felt awkward. Perhaps it was because both of them knew exactly what might happen next. The anticipation itself made them self-conscious. After another long pause, Teng Mo finally spoke in an unusually stiff voice. So, why don't you take a shower first? Wu Shi Xian set the yogurt down, removed his guitar case, placed it on the sofa, and headed toward the bathroom. Teng Mo called after him. You're just going in like that? Wu Shi Xian looked back. What else? I'll get you some clean clothes and a fresh towel. The sound of running water soon filled the bathroom. Teng Mo lit a cigarette. By the time Wu Shi Xian finished showering, Teng Mo had already smoked 3. A fourth, still unlit, hung loosely from his lips as he turned toward the bathroom door the moment it opened. Wu Shi Xian stood awkwardly in the doorway, his damp hair still dripping. He usually dressed entirely in black, jeans, Doc Martens, and an air of detached coolness tinged with gloom. But now, Without the dark clothes, the blue face paint, or the traces of nights spent wandering through clubs and bars, he looked startlingly fresh. Wearing nothing more than a plain white t-shirt and loose shorts, he resembled a bright-eyed college freshman. For a moment, Teng Mo simply stared. "I'm done." After waiting for a long while without hearing a word, Wu Shi Xian finally spoke, feeling increasingly uncomfortable under Teng Mo's unwavering gaze. Oh, Teng Mo seemed to snap back to reality. He removed the cigarette from his mouth, paused, then said, "My clothes actually fit you pretty well." He casually set the unlit cigarette on the coffee table, stood up, dug a hair dryer out of a cabinet, and stuffed it into Wu Shi Xian's arms. "Dry your hair, or you'll catch a cold." When Teng Mo finished his own shower and stepped out, music drifted from the bedroom. Still drying his hair with a towel, he shuffled over in his slippers and looked through the doorway. Wu Shi Xian sat on the edge of the bed, gently strumming his guitar. His freshly dried ash-blue hair flowed softly down his back. Hearing Teng Mo's footsteps, Wu Shi Xian didn't look up. Clear, melodious notes flowed effortlessly from beneath his fingertips, as though the music itself allowed him to relax. Leaning against the doorframe, Teng Mo quietly watched for a while before suddenly tossing the towel aside. He walked over, kicked off his slippers, and climbed onto the bed. The mattress shifted beneath his weight. Wu Shi Xian stopped playing and turned to look at him, surprise flashing across his face. Resting against the headboard with one knee raised, Teng Mo smiled gently. "Don't stop. Keep playing." Wu Shi Xian kept his fingers resting on the strings. After a brief silence, he asked, "Want to request a song?" Looking at him across the length of the bed, Teng Mo smiled. "Is there an extra charge for requests tonight?" Wu Shi Xian lowered his eyes and shook his head. "No." Teng Mo hugged one knee and rested his chin on it while thinking for a moment. "Then sing Dawn, Please Don't Come." "That's an old song. You didn't even ask whether I knew it." Teng Mo looked at him with lingering warmth. "So do you?" Wu Shi Xian met his gaze. The instant their eyes locked, he hurriedly looked away, as though he'd been shocked. He sat with his back to Teng Mo for a long while before finally pressing his fingers against the strings. The wistful introduction slowly filled the room. Then Wu Shi Xian's deep, magnetic voice rose softly. "Dawn, please don't come. Let tonight's dream last forever." He sang with complete concentration. There were no elaborate arrangements, no heavy effects, only a guitar and a voice powerful enough to fill the room. Teng Mo had never imagined he could one day be so moved by another man's singing. Don't let the rising sun tear us apart. Don't leave while this beautiful night still lingers. The lyrics felt as though they belonged to the two of them. He had only ever seen Wu Shi Xian at night, never beneath the sun. They had met in darkness. If dawn never came, could he keep looking at Wu Shi Xian like this forever? If the sun never rose, could he truly keep him? Teng Mo felt completely enchanted. His eyes remained fixed on the slender figure in the white t-shirt. Slowly, he sat up and edged closer. Wu Shi Xian sensed the movement behind him but didn't turn around. His voice, however, tightened ever so slightly. "I beg the dawn not to reveal its colors. This dreamlike poetry can never be replaced." Now less than an arm's length separated them. Teng Mo slowly reached out. The moment his fingertips brushed Wu Shi Xian's shoulder, Wu Shi Xian trembled. Yet he neither moved away nor stopped playing. Teng Mo waited. When Wu Shi Xian made no attempt to escape, he gently swept the long hair aside, letting it fall over Wu Shi Xian's right shoulder and exposing the smooth nape of his neck. Wu Shi Xian's voice began to tremble, as though he were anticipating what would come next, or perhaps fearing it. Kneeling behind him, Teng Mo slowly stroked the back of his neck. His warm, dry fingertips traced each vertebra before he lowered his head and pressed a gentle kiss against the small bump at the base of Wu Shi Xian's neck. The instant those soft lips touched his skin, Wu Shi Xian shivered violently. His fingers faltered. The melody broke. Teng Mo leaned forward, slipped both arms beneath Wu Shi Xian's, clasped his hands together over Wu Shi Xian's chest, and pulled him back into a firm embrace. Wu Shi Xian's breathing grew ragged. His chest rose and fell heavily. His singing became increasingly fragmented, interrupted by unsteady breaths. Teng Mo gently nibbled the edge of his ear and whispered softly, "Don't stop. Keep singing." Warm breath brushed against his ear. Wu Shi Xian shivered again, goosebumps racing across his back. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to continue. But Teng Mo held him so tightly, one broad hand pressed against his chest, stroking him in slow, rhythmic motions, that his voice kept breaking apart. In the deepest darkness, holding you close, don't let the morning light slip inside. A mist of tears gathered in Wu Shi Xian's eyes. He couldn't understand why Teng Mo had chosen this song. It was so possessive, so desperate, and yet so intoxicating. It told the story of Ning Kaichen and Xia Xiaoqian, lovers who should never have fallen in love, whose relationship had been doomed from the very beginning, who would never stand together beneath the daylight, yet who became hopelessly entangled with each other in the darkness of the night. It was exactly like him and Teng Mo. Chapter 26. If you don't like it, you can imagine I'm a woman. Teng Mo pulled Wu Shi Xian tightly into his arms, holding him with enough force to make it hard to breathe. His kisses trailed from the tip of Wu Shi Xian's ear down to his collarbone. Wu Shi Xian leaned back against Teng Mo's shoulder. The embrace was so tight that he could barely draw a breath, much less sing another note. His fingers brushed the strings, producing only a series of harsh, discordant sounds. Teng Mo's warm breath against his ear sent a shiver through him. The chest pressed against his back radiated heat, and every kiss against his collarbone felt so hot it seemed capable of setting his skin ablaze. Their breathing gradually fell into the same rhythm. Wu Shi Xian tilted his face slightly to the left, and Teng Mo's cheek brushed lightly against his lips. It was such a fleeting touch that it could almost have been imagined. With the corners of his eyes tinged red, Wu Shi Xian stared at the face only inches away. If he turned his head just a little more, or if Teng Mo shifted slightly, they could kiss, and he could pretend it had happened by accident. His heart pounded violently in his chest. The hand that had been playing the guitar gripped Teng Mo's wrist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But Teng Mo never turned. Instead, he buried his face in the crook of Wu Shi Xian's shoulder, clinging to him like a cold-blooded creature seeking warmth, greedily absorbing every trace of heat from his body. Wu Shi Xian shifted restlessly in his embrace, the sensation almost unbearable. Teng Mo had ignited every nerve in his body, yet refused to kiss him. He offered no comfort, only relentless teasing. Those wandering hands moved from his chest to his waist, over his abdomen, and then lower still. Wu Shi Xian arched his back, stretching his neck as his breathing grew ragged. Like a fish stranded on dry land, he struggled instinctively, though escape was impossible. Then Teng Mo's hand wrapped around him. Wu Shi Xian caught his breath. He was already painfully hard. The touch filled him with both embarrassment and overwhelming desire, leaving his eyes flushed crimson. Teng Mo slowly stroked him from base to tip once, then a second time, before stopping. Just as Wu Shi Xian trembled on the edge of losing control, Teng Mo spoke beside his ear in an even, matter-of-fact voice. "Did you take your meds?" It felt as though a bucket of icy water had been poured over his head. The warmth vanished in an instant. How could someone holding him so gently say something so cold in such a flat voice? Wu Shi Xian froze before suddenly struggling with all his strength, desperately trying to shove Teng Mo away. Reacting immediately, Teng Mo wrapped both him and the guitar tightly in his arms, refusing to let either move. Wu Shi Xian fought until his face turned bright red. "Let go of me." Teng Mo held on firmly. "You took your medicine. Why won't you let me do it?" That only made Wu Shi Xian struggle harder. He kicked wildly, nearly sending both of them tumbling onto the bed. "The guitar!" Teng Mo shouted. "You're going to break the guitar." The reminder instantly made Wu Shi Xian stop. It was the most valuable thing he owned. He could never afford to replace it. Feeling him finally calm down, Teng Mo let out a quiet sigh of relief. "I'm going to let go," he said softly. "Just stay calm, all right?" The moment Teng Mo loosened his grip, Wu Shi Xian immediately removed the guitar. As he carefully placed it back into its case, Teng Mo rushed forward again, wrapped an arm around his waist, turned him around, and pressed him onto the bed. Wu Shi Xian struggled fiercely, but Teng Mo pinned him down with his body, catching both wrists and holding them above his head. "What brought this on?" Teng Mo asked gently. "It's not the first time. I'm not going to hurt you." Biting his lip, Wu Shi Xian said nothing. He strained to free his wrists, but Teng Mo refused to let go. The truth was that they were evenly matched in size and strength. If Wu Shi Xian had truly wanted to escape, he had countless ways to do it. A knee to the groin, a headbutt, any number of openings. He used none of them. He didn't want to hurt Teng Mo. That moment of hesitation was enough. Teng Mo leaned down and kissed him. Life truly had a cruel sense of humor. When he had wanted this kiss, it had never come. Now that he no longer wanted it, it was finally being given. Wu Shi Xian turned his head left. Teng Mo followed. He turned right. Teng Mo followed again. When Wu Shi Xian stubbornly kept his lips closed, Teng Mo slowly licked across them before pressing his tongue gently against the seam of his mouth. When Wu Shi Xian clenched his teeth, Teng Mo patiently traced them one by one, sending waves of trembling through his body until it felt as though he were slowly melting away. At last, Teng Mo coaxed his lips apart. The moment their tongues met, Wu Shi Xian's final resistance collapsed. He stopped struggling. Even if he could escape physically, he could never escape emotionally. Despite everything that had happened, his body had never once calmed. Without taking any medication, his desire had remained unchanged. That alone was enough to tell him the truth. He had no defense against this man. So be it. There might not even be a tomorrow. He would simply treat every day they had together as borrowed time. Life was already difficult enough. Why waste a night like this? Sensing the tension leave Wu Shi Xian's body, Teng Mo cautiously released one of his wrists. Immediately, Wu Shi Xian wrapped both arms around Teng Mo's neck, parted his lips, and welcomed him. Their kiss deepened. Every unspoken hesitation, every doubt, every attempt to resist dissolved into its warmth. Finally, just before they became one, Teng Mo brushed the damp strands of hair away from Wu Shi Xian's forehead, kissed him there, and whispered with remarkable tenderness, "If you don't like this, you can imagine I'm a woman." Wu Shi Xian looked directly into his eyes. Would a woman do this to me? Caught off guard, Teng Mo fell silent for a moment before answering only with action. Wu Shi Xian let out a muffled groan, pain immediately crossing his features. Teng Mo felt it too. He was unbelievably tense, so much so that it almost felt as though this were his first experience. Afraid of hurting him, Teng Mo moved with deliberate restraint, giving him time to adjust. Wu Shi Xian clutched the sheets beneath him, breathing unevenly. As Teng Mo moved closer, he kissed him again, so deeply that Wu Shi Xian trembled as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Little by little, his body relaxed, and the tension gradually eased. Teng Mo slipped his hands beneath Wu Shi Xian's shoulders and held him securely as their movements became deeper and steadier. The room filled with the sounds of their uneven breathing and the rustle of sheets. Wu Shi Xian's pale skin gradually flushed with color. At first he endured everything in silence, teeth clenched tight, but before long quiet, broken sounds escaped despite himself. Holding him close, Teng Mo eventually paused, breathing hard. "How was that?" he asked softly. "Are you all right?" Wu Shi Xian lay there, trying to catch his breath. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, his eyes shimmered as he looked quietly at Teng Mo. Then he said, "Actually, I didn't take my medication today." Still breathing heavily, Teng Mo asked, "Then when do you take it?" "When you go home with a female client." Wu Shi Xian remained silent for a long moment, enduring his gaze before finally turning his face away. Covering his eyes with one hand, he murmured so quietly it was almost impossible to hear, "I only take it when I'm with someone I don't like." "What?" Teng Mo asked. "I didn't catch that." But Wu Shi Xian pressed his lips together and refused to repeat himself. Teng Mo had never intended to push him so far. He had wanted to be gentle, to leave Wu Shi Xian with a memory worth keeping, perhaps enough that he would be willing to accept his money and come home with him again. But his heartbeat was out of control. Before he even realized it, the careful restraint he had relied on all his life had completely fallen away. He had always believed himself calm and rational. Now, in a single instant, that certainty was gone. As Teng Mo held him tightly, the realization overwhelmed him before he even understood it himself. Meanwhile, beneath him, a sudden wave of sadness washed over Wu Shi Xian. It was not exactly painful, nor was it especially pleasurable, yet tears slipped silently down his face. Still, it made no difference. Teng Mo would never understand. He would only assume that Wu Shi Xian had been brought to tears by him alone. Chapter 27. Don't leave tonight. When Teng Mo woke up the next day, it was already noon. The room was quiet, and Wu Shi Xian had long since left. It started raining that afternoon, a steady, drizzling rain. Business was slow, so Teng Mo lit a cigarette, pulled over a stool, and sat in the doorway, watching the rain. The endless curtain of rain reminded him of Wu Shi Xian's tears. The kid had cried after sex the last time too, but last night had felt different somehow. Then there was that comment. I only take the pill when I'm with someone I don't like. What was that supposed to mean? Did it mean he actually liked him a little? Teng Mo stubbed out his cigarette in a rain puddle and sighed. This was becoming complicated. He admitted he was fond of the kid. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so uninhibited in bed. But for adults, liking someone usually ended there. A simple transactional relationship based on money was the most suitable arrangement for him and Wu Shi Xian. The kid carried too many secrets he wasn't willing to share, and Teng Mo had no intention of prying. After all, what adult didn't have secrets? Even he had a stomach full of things he couldn't tell anyone. Everything had been fine as it was. They had maintained a delicate balance, an unspoken understanding, while doing what adults did. But Wu Shi Xian was still young. He wanted to break through that barrier and lay everything bare. Maybe it was time to end things. If they went any further, it probably wouldn't end well. The drizzle continued for several days. Standing at the shop entrance with a teacup in hand, Teng Mo told himself, the weather's terrible. It's not a good time to go out. So he stayed put. He didn't go out, and he didn't visit Blue Moon either. As long as Wu Shi Xian didn't come looking for him, he was sure he could hold out. He would drink more tea, cultivate some inner peace, and eventually forget about everything. It had been the same during his first 2 years in Jinyang. The unfamiliar city, unfamiliar people, and complete separation from his old life had all become ordinary with time. Despite the many adult shops along Bar Street, Wu Shi Xian deliberately came to his store to buy medication. He pushed open the door on a rainy night, bringing a wave of damp air inside. Looking up from behind the counter, Teng Mo froze. Wu Shi Xian stood in the doorway like a drenched blue peacock whose magnificent feathers had been soaked through, looking more like a stray dog than anything else. After a brief moment of shock, Teng Mo immediately stood up. You came out in this rain without an umbrella? Wu Shi Xian didn't answer. He walked over, took cash from his pocket, and placed the damp bills on the counter one by one. A box of Viagra. Water dripped steadily from his hair, and even his sleeves were soaked. Teng Mo looked at him silently for a moment before bending down to retrieve a box of Viagra from beneath the counter and handing it over. Wu Shi Xian said nothing else. He turned to leave. Teng Mo quickly grabbed the hand holding the medicine. His fingers were ice cold from the rain. You're really leaving like this? Aren't you even going to borrow an umbrella? Wu Shi Xian tried to shake him off. After failing several times, he said coldly, let go. Leaning over the counter, Teng Mo caught his arm with his other hand, his voice softening. Don't go. Stay here tonight. Go take a hot shower and change into dry clothes first, or you'll catch a cold. Wu Shi Xian's expression remained icy as he stubbornly tried to pry Teng Mo's hand away. None of your business. Teng Mo patiently reasoned with him. If you hadn't come here, then fine. I wouldn't know whether you caught a cold or got a fever. But now that I've seen you, I can't just ignore it. Wu Shi Xian was as stubborn as a mule. Seeing that he was about to wrench himself free, Teng Mo panicked. Afraid Wu Shi Xian would run straight back into the rain, he clung desperately to the end of his sleeve, planted one foot on the counter, and prepared to vault over it. In his imagination, he would leap gracefully over the counter with a single push. Reality was far less impressive. The counter was too high. Instead of clearing it, he ended up awkwardly straddling it while shouting, "Don't run away." Wu Shi Xian was so stunned by the ridiculous sight that he completely forgot to take the opportunity to escape. When Teng Mo finally managed to get one leg over, he stumbled, nearly splitting his pants and almost crashing face first onto the floor. Fortunately, Wu Shi Xian reacted quickly enough to catch him. But the old fox had no sense of fair play. The instant he regained his balance, he wrapped both arms around Wu Shi Xian's waist. Trapped in the embrace, Wu Shi Xian struggled furiously. Let go. No. Despite being older, Teng Mo was just as shameless as any young man. Didn't you come here specifically to see me? Since you're already here, why keep pretending? Wu Shi Xian's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Don't flatter yourself. Teng Mo replied confidently. Then tell me. There are so many shops around. Why did you insist on buying from me? Wu Shi Xian answered just as confidently. Because you're the cheapest within 10 miles. Teng Mo paused. Wait, are you short on money? What ordinary person isn't? Wu Shi Xian was breathing hard from struggling. Let go. Instead, Teng Mo shamelessly rested his chin on Wu Shi Xian's damp shoulder. How about? I keep you as my lover? How much do you want? Wu Shi Xian's shoulder trembled slightly. He stopped struggling but remained silent. Still leaning against him, Teng Mo spoke gently. If you don't want that, that's fine. But surely you can stay for just one night. Wu Shi Xian still didn't answer. 5,000 for one night is fine too. Out of ideas, Teng Mo hugged him tighter and gently rocked him. Say something, will you? After a long silence, Wu Shi Xian finally asked awkwardly. Why did you stop coming to Blue Moon? Without the slightest hesitation, Teng Mo lied through his teeth. I'm getting old. I've got rheumatism. My knees ache whenever it rains, so I don't feel like going out. Wu Shi Xian looked genuinely shocked. That's the reason? Teng Mo answered without missing a beat. Yeah, what else did you think? Wu Shi Xian clearly wore the expression of someone thinking, I know you're lying, but I can't prove it. Seeing that the tension had eased, Teng Mo asked cautiously. Can I let go now? Don't run away. Be good and go take a shower. Wu Shi Xian finally nodded. Okay. When Wu Shi Xian came out after showering and changing into dry clothes, Teng Mo wasn't sitting on the sofa. Instead, he was busy in the kitchen. Curious, Wu Shi Xian walked over to the doorway. Teng Mo turned, saw him, and beckoned. Come here. Wu Shi Xian walked over in confusion. Teng Mo handed him a steaming bowl filled with a dark liquid. Frowning, Wu Shi Xian accepted it. Drink it, Teng Mo urged. It's not poison. Under Teng Mo's expectant gaze, Wu Shi Xian steeled himself and cautiously took a sip. It was sweet. Brown sugar ginger tea. Teng Mo had made it perfectly. It was warm and sweet, with just a gentle hint of ginger instead of an overpowering spicy taste. Wu Shi Xian took another large mouthful. Watching him, Teng Mo smiled brightly. Sweet. For once, Wu Shi Xian nodded obediently. Drink it all. It'll keep you from catching a cold. Wu Shi Xian obediently continued sipping the tea. Bathed in the warm kitchen light, Teng Mo asked gently. Why didn't you bring your guitar today? I left it at the bar. I didn't have an umbrella, and I was afraid it would get wet. Teng Mo reached out and gently touched his still damp hair. You were worried about your guitar getting wet, but not yourself? Aren't you more precious than a guitar? Wu Shi Xian lowered his eyes to the bowl in his hands. After a long silence, he said quietly, Something is only precious if someone treasures it. If nobody cares about it, even a diamond is just a worthless stone. It sounded as though he was talking about the guitar, yet it also sounded as though he wasn't. A sharp ache pierced Teng Mo's heart. They stood in silence for a while. Finally, Teng Mo gently patted his shoulder. I'm going to take a shower. Finish your tea and go to bed. Teng Mo spent nearly half an hour in the bathroom. When he came out and looked into the bedroom, he found Wu Shi Xian already asleep, or at least lying obediently in bed, curled beneath the blanket. Teng Mo turned off the light, took off his shoes, and climbed into bed. At first, they lay back to back. Wu Shi Xian remained perfectly still. Not even the sound of his breathing could be heard. Yet Teng Mo was certain he wasn't asleep. After lying stiffly for several minutes, Teng Mo finally couldn't resist. He turned over and wrapped his arms around Wu Shi Xian from behind. Wu Shi Xian didn't resist. Instead, he quietly relaxed into Teng Mo's embrace. After holding him silently for a while, Teng Mo spoke softly. Shi Xian, how old are you? It took a long time before Wu Shi Xian answered. 21. What about you? I'm 30 this year. Teng Mo smiled self-mockingly. 30 years old, an age when a man is supposed to have established himself. But I've accomplished nothing. Wu Shi Xian nestled a little closer, awkwardly trying to comfort him. I think you're amazing. You can't judge a person by appearances. Teng Mo chuckled softly and buried his face against the side of Wu Shi Xian's neck. You're still young. In the future, if you meet someone who truly cherishes you, you can leave whenever you want. You don't have to worry about me. Okay. Wu Shi Xian's reply was muffled, carrying the faintest trace of a nasal tone. I understand. Chapter 28. I like small breasts. Teng Mo stopped deliberately avoiding Wu Shi Xian. Rain or shine. Even during a hailstorm, whenever Wu Shi Xian performed, Teng Mo would unfailingly show up at Blue Moon. Wu Shi Xian still loved singing rock, but whenever Teng Mo was there, he would always dedicate a gentle song to him. Teng Mo also stopped leaving early. He would stay until Wu Shi Xian finished his final song. Many times, Teng Mo watched Wu Shi Xian entertain customers at other booths. Yet when the performance ended, Wu Shi Xian never left with anyone else. Once, Teng Mo cautiously asked, "Did you turn down the other clients?" Wu Shi Xian gave him a vague reply, clearly unwilling to explain further, so Teng Mo didn't press the matter. Although Wu Shi Xian never directly responded to Teng Mo's proposal of becoming his kept man, his actions amounted to silent acceptance. Whenever Teng Mo stayed after the show to wait for him, Wu Shi Xian would quietly go home with him. Sometimes they would make love passionately for hours, soaking the sheets with sweat until Wu Shi Xian's voice turned hoarse and raspy. Other times, they did nothing at all, simply holding each other as they slept. Each time, Teng Mo transferred money to Wu Shi Xian in advance, sometimes 5,000 yuan, sometimes 500. No matter how much it was, Wu Shi Xian never refused it or asked any questions. Once, Teng Mo deliberately transferred only 1 yuan. Even then, Wu Shi Xian obediently went home with him without saying a word. Yet Wu Shi Xian still bought a box of Viagra every week, even though Teng Mo had never actually seen him take it before they went to bed together. So where did all that Viagra go? Surely he wasn't buying it just to resell it for a profit? Teng Mo vaguely remembered reading that Viagra had originally been developed to treat cardiovascular disease before it was used for erectile dysfunction. Could Wu Shi Xian be taking it for some medical condition? He quickly dismissed the idea. Someone with heart problems shouldn't be having such vigorous sex. Considering how intense their nights together were, if Wu Shi Xian really had a heart condition, something disastrous would probably have happened long ago. So why was he buying it, and when was he taking it? As Teng Mo mentally replayed the time they had spent together, he suddenly noticed something strange. Wu Shi Xian was like a nocturnal creature. He never appeared in Teng Mo's daytime life. They always met at night, and every morning, Wu Shi Xian left before Teng Mo woke up. At first, Teng Mo assumed he simply woke up too late. He started setting alarms earlier and earlier, gradually moving them from noon to 11, then 10. Finally, he forced himself to wake up at 7 in the morning. When he groggily opened his eyes, Wu Shi Xian was already gone. That meant Wu Shi Xian must have gotten up sometime after 6. But the night before, they hadn't fallen asleep until 2 or 3 in the morning. So Wu Shi Xian only slept 3 or 4 hours. Why did he get up so early every day? Was he a vampire who couldn't face the sunlight? Where did he go after leaving in the morning? What was he doing before showing up at the bar that night? Lost in thought, Teng Mo wrapped both hands around his Long Island iced tea. Someone suddenly tapped him on the arm. He looked up to see the bartender smiling at him. "Brother Teng, what are you thinking about so deeply?" Teng Mo blinked, still distracted. "Huh." The bartender nodded toward his right. "That beauty over there is saying hello." Following his gaze, Teng Mo turned his head. She really was beautiful, with fiery red lips, bright, expressive eyes, and a head of lively curls. She had a bold, eye-catching kind of beauty. Leaning against the bar, she smiled at him. "Handsome, are you waiting for someone?" "Yeah." Teng Mo returned the smile. "I'm waiting for a friend too, but he hasn't arrived yet. How about I keep you company for a while?" "Sure." Teng Mo agreed politely, though he had no intention of buying her a drink. The young woman didn't seem to mind. She ordered herself a margarita and casually chatted with Teng Mo about cocktails as though they had known each other for years. Teng Mo responded half-heartedly. He guessed this was probably her first time at Blue Moon. The regulars all knew he came here only for the music. Trying to pick him up was a waste of time. After struggling through some awkward small talk, the young woman finally got to the point. "Hey, handsome, could I borrow your phone to make a call?" "No." Teng Mo smiled pleasantly, pretending not to understand the hidden meaning behind the request. Left with no choice, she became more straightforward. "Then can we add each other on WeChat?" "No to that either." His smile never faded, but his refusal was immediate. She understood perfectly, but she still wasn't ready to give up. Puffing out her chest, she asked, "What? Don't you like curly hair? Or are you just not into big boobs?" Teng Mo glanced at her chest. She was certainly well endowed. Quite impressive, really. What a pity. Just as he was about to answer, a cold voice suddenly came from behind him. That's right. He doesn't. Teng Mo turned around. At some point, Wu Shi Xian had already stepped off the stage and was now standing beside him with a dark expression. An unmistakable aura of resentment radiated from him, practically shouting, "Begone, temptress." The moment Teng Mo saw his face, he almost laughed. He had intended to tease him, but then thought better of it. Wu Shi Xian wasn't good at handling teasing, and if he overdid it, he'd probably spend the entire night coaxing him. Suppressing his smile, Teng Mo cleared his throat and played along. That's right. I like small breasts. I also like long hair. The young woman looked down at her ample chest, tossed her curls, and pouted. Boring. After she sashayed away, Teng Mo turned back to Wu Shi Xian. How do you know I don't like that? Only after driving the woman away did Wu Shi Xian seem to realize he might have overstepped. Afraid Teng Mo might be angry, he pursed his lips, secretly glanced at Teng Mo's expression, and replied in a stiff, indifferent tone. If you really like curly hair, I could try it. Oh. Resting his chin on one hand, Teng Mo looked at him with obvious interest. And what if I like huge breasts? Could you try that too? A complicated expression crossed Wu Shi Xian's handsome face. After a long silence, he finally answered. I can't. Teng Mo's gaze slowly drifted to Wu Shi Xian's chest and stayed there for a full 10 seconds. Keeping a perfectly straight face, he said, You know, I've heard that massaging breasts helps them grow. How about you let me test that theory tonight? Wu Shi Xian's face immediately turned red. Get lost. Chapter 29. Don't touch me if you don't like it. Get lost. You can cook. You're practically the perfect wife. Teng Mo followed Wu Shi Xian around, trying to sneak a piece of sliced tomato, but Wu Shi Xian slapped his hand away without hesitation. What else are we supposed to eat if no one cooks? Wu Shi Xian replied coldly as he scooped the scrambled eggs out of the pan, then added the tomatoes and began stir-frying them. Take out. Teng Mo rubbed his reddened hand, as though it were the most obvious answer in the world. But the braised pork rice he'd ordered that evening had been terrible, leaving him hungry. On the way back, he'd wanted to order barbecue, but Wu Shi Xian had refused, insisting it wasn't healthy and offering to make fried rice instead. Watching Wu Shi Xian busy at the stove, Teng Mo, with nothing to do, wandered around the kitchen. Suddenly, he remembered their conversation at the bar about big breasts. As though possessed, he reached out from behind and shamelessly grabbed Wu Shi Xian's flat chest. Wu Shi Xian had just tossed the pan with his left hand when Teng Mo ambushed him, nearly sending the tomatoes flying onto the floor. What the hell? Teng Mo cupped his hand, trying to grab something, but found nothing but empty air. He gave another squeeze before commenting in a lingering, teasing tone. You really are pretty flat. Wu Shi Xian's face instantly flushed red with anger. You fucking... I'm a guy. It's rare for a guy to be this flat, Teng Mo said righteously, though his hand remained anything but well-behaved. His fingers traced slow circles across Wu Shi Xian's chest. Beneath his black leather jacket, Wu Shi Xian wore a tight black tank top, and the thin fabric did little to block the warmth of Teng Mo's wandering hand. Before long, Teng Mo felt two small, firm buds stiffening beneath the fabric. He flicked one lightly with his fingertip. They're still growing. You should eat more and put on a little weight. They'll feel nicer to touch. Still gripping the spatula and stirring the food, Wu Shi Xian could only curse through his embarrassment. If you don't like it, then don't touch me. Get lost. The shameless old pervert acted as though he hadn't heard a word. He continued rubbing the two hardened buds, and when that wasn't enough, he pinched them between his fingertips. Wu Shi Xian's hand jerked involuntarily, sending a piece of egg flying out of the pan and onto the stovetop. Watching the egg fall, Wu Shi Xian's frustration flared. Just as he set down the pan handle to pry Teng Mo's hand away, Teng Mo suddenly inhaled sharply. Huh. Already flustered by the pinching, Wu Shi Xian snapped. What now? Teng Mo exclaimed dramatically. Your nipples got hard. Wu Shi Xian's ears instantly turned bright red, though he stubbornly denied it. I did not. Without another word, Teng Mo grabbed Wu Shi Xian's hand and pressed it against his own chest. If you don't believe me, feel for yourself. Beneath his palm, on his flat chest, A small hardened nub stood unmistakably erect. Startled, Wu Shi Xian quickly snatched his hand back. Running a hand through his hair, he dumped the cooked rice into the pan. As he stir-fried everything as quickly as possible, he raised his voice to hide his embarrassment. "Do you still want to eat or not?" "I do," Teng Mo replied, suppressing a laugh. Wu Shi Xian's attempt to deny it had been painfully obvious. Resting his chin on Wu Shi Xian's shoulder, he continued absent-mindedly playing with the two swollen, hardened buds on his chest. "But you're not finished cooking yet, are you?" Wu Shi Xian couldn't understand why a man's chest would react this way when touched, nor why his nipples could be so sensitive. It made him feel strangely indecent. He didn't want Teng Mo to think he was feminine, yet Teng Mo kept rolling one sensitive tip between his fingers, rubbing it until Wu Shi Xian's legs went weak and he could barely keep hold of the spatula. Desperate to escape the awkward situation, he endured the unfamiliar sensations and hurried through the stir-fry. He finished cooking in record time, barely paying attention to the heat or the seasoning. He couldn't even remember whether he'd added salt. All he wanted was to get it over with and escape. The moment he turned off the stove, he didn't even bother plating the food. Instead, he reached out to grab Teng Mo's wandering hands. "It's finished." Instead, Teng Mo turned him around, pressed him back against the kitchen cabinets, and suddenly lifted his tank top. Beneath the black fabric was a pale chest. His nipples, rubbed until they were a deep, flushed red, were exposed to the cool air, trembling invitingly. Wu Shi Xian hurriedly tried to push Teng Mo's hands away, a trace of pleading in his voice. Let's eat first." Teng Mo licked his lips and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "I'm eating you first." Chapter 30, Don't. Not here. As Teng Mo took one of the hardened peaks of his chest into his mouth, Wu Shi Xian bit down hard on his lower lip, suppressing the gasp that threatened to escape. Teng Mo teased him with slow, deliberate strokes of his tongue, circling the sensitive peak before lightly grazing it with his teeth. Wu Shi Xian arched his back, trembling. The gentle bite brought a flicker of pain, but it quickly dissolved into something stranger, an aching itch, a tingling numbness, an unfamiliar pleasure that left his legs weak beneath him. Feeling as though he could no longer remain standing, he braced himself against the cabinet behind him. Through hazy eyes, he looked down. First he saw the crown of Teng Mo's soft, dark hair, then the familiar features that always seemed so gentle, his brows, his eyes, the straight bridge of his nose. Lower still, he caught sight of Teng Mo's tongue, vivid and rosy, curling around the oversensitive flesh with maddening patience. God, this was unbearably erotic. It was such a small, insignificant patch of skin, serving no real purpose, yet it seemed to awaken something buried deep inside him. His breathing grew ragged, his skin burned with heat, and fine beads of sweat gathered across his forehead. After lingering over one side, Teng Mo moved to the other, leaving both flushed, damp, and intensely sensitive. Wu Shi Xian's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, each exhale washing over Teng Mo in waves of warmth. As Teng Mo continued his slow, relentless attention, he tilted his head slightly and glanced up. The moment their eyes met, he froze. Wu Shi Xian was staring directly at him. His eyes shimmered with moisture, the corners tinged pink, while his parted lips trembled as though silently asking for a kiss. Teng Mo found himself captivated by the brilliant blue of those eyes. After a brief pause, he leaned forward without hesitation and claimed Wu Shi Xian's lips. A soft, helpless sound escaped Wu Shi Xian as his eyes fluttered shut. He was like a butterfly with broken wings, a wolf stripped of its fangs. From the moment he accepted that little white pill from Teng Mo at the bar, he had stepped willingly into the hunter's trap. And before he realized it, he had allowed himself to be tamed. Teng Mo cupped Wu Shi Xian's face as though holding something infinitely precious, kissing him again and again with quiet desperation until Wu Shi Xian trembled as though he could scarcely breathe. Only when he feared Wu Shi Xian might truly run out of air did Teng Mo finally pull back. But before Wu Shi Xian had fully caught his breath, Teng Mo slipped 2 fingers into his mouth. Wu Shi Xian stared at him with wide, glistening eyes, accepting them in dazed confusion. Without a word, Teng Mo slowly drew his fingers back before reaching to remove his own trousers. Only then did Wu Shi Xian seem to understand what he intended. Flushing brightly, he reached out to stop him. Don't. Not here. But Teng Mo had already abandoned his usual restraint. He turned Wu Shi Xian around, lowered his trousers, and quickly prepared him. Their growing familiarity made the process easier than before, but Teng Mo's patience lasted only a moment before he pulled him close. Wait, wait. Wu Shi Xian reached back in alarm, but Teng Mo caught his hand and gently pinned him against the cool marble countertop before drawing him into an intimate embrace. When his already oversensitive chest brushed the cold stone, Wu Shi Xian shivered violently. Relax. Teng Mo breathed through clenched teeth. Even now, Wu Shi Xian remained astonishingly tense, just as he had been the very first time. The sensation nearly robbed Teng Mo of his composure. This was driving him mad. At this rate, he thought with helpless amusement, perhaps one day he really would be left completely exhausted. Then so be it. Even if the Grim Reapers themselves appeared with their chains, they would simply have to wait. With that thought, Teng Mo abandoned all restraint, holding Wu Shi Xian tightly as the two of them lost themselves in the moment. Wu Shi Xian, still inexperienced, could only cling to the countertop as broken cries escaped him. You're too deep, too deep. Yet Teng Mo only wanted to draw closer still, close enough to leave an unforgettable place in Wu Shi Xian's heart. Leaning down, he gently lifted Wu Shi Xian's chin, kissed away the tears gathering at the corners of his eyes, and captured his lips once more in a kiss that was impossibly tender. Wu Shi Xian's trousers remained bunched around his thighs, leaving him trapped in an awkward, vulnerable position among the scattered condiments and kitchen utensils. Everything had happened so suddenly, yet there was something strangely intoxicating about that urgency. The possessive kisses, the unrestrained passion, the way Teng Mo, normally so calm and composed, seemed to lose control. Could it be that Teng Mo truly liked him? Otherwise, why would someone usually so refined abandon all elegance like this? By the time Teng Mo was finally satisfied, the kitchen was in complete disarray. Several bowls had shattered on the floor, salt and MSG were scattered everywhere, and the air was thick with the lingering aftermath of their passion. As Wu Shi Xian pulled up his trousers, he exclaimed in exasperation, "We have a bed, don't we? Why did we have to do it in the kitchen?" Teng Mo offered an apologetic smile as he picked up a broom. Well, just like food tastes best when it's fresh, the same goes for moments like this. You couldn't wait even a little longer? I couldn't, Teng Mo admitted with complete sincerity. Wu Shi Xian wanted to stay angry, but the earnest look on Teng Mo's face made it nearly impossible. Huffing, he reheated the food, plated it, and pushed it across the table. Don't complain if it doesn't taste good. Just eat, and then we're going to bed. Teng Mo didn't stand on ceremony. He was genuinely starving. After taking several enthusiastic bites, he asked through a mouthful of food, "Shi Xian, are you free tomorrow?" What? Summer's coming, and I want to buy some new clothes. Will you come with me? Wu Shi Xian paused, his chopsticks suspended in midair. Tomorrow. I already have something to do. How about Saturday? Teng Mo nodded without asking for an explanation. Sure. Whatever day works for you. Then, Saturday. Sounds good. Chapter 31. You've dreamed about me? It was a beautiful Saturday. Late spring was giving way to early summer, the gentlest time of year, when even the breeze brushing against one's face carried a hint of warmth. Teng Mo got up unusually early. His alarm had gone off at 9, but before he had even finished brushing his teeth, Wu Shi Xian had already arrived. With his toothbrush still in his mouth, Teng Mo went to open the shop door. Wu Shi Xian stood at the foot of the steps with his hands in his pockets. He wore a black jacket and jeans, with a waist bag slung across his chest. Instead of his usual high ponytail, his long hair was tied back simply, and his lips were a natural pale pink. He looked up. The morning sunlight fell across his youthful face, giving his skin the smooth luster of fine porcelain. He was like a meticulously crafted instrument or a length of exquisite satin, so captivating that it was impossible to look away. Teng Mo stood there, frozen. Seeing him staring blankly, Wu Shi Xian frowned slightly. A trace of inexplicable shyness crossed his face as he stepped forward and gave Teng Mo a gentle shove. Go finish brushing your teeth. After breakfast, the meal Wu Shi Xian had brought, Teng Mo closed the shop, and the two of them walked to the bus stop together. While they waited for the bus, Teng Mo kept sneaking glances at Wu Shi Xian. Standing together beneath the gentle morning sun amid the bustling city, they looked just like any ordinary couple, quietly sharing the simplest kind of happiness. Once they boarded the bus, they took the window seats in the back row. Wu Shi Xian looked out the window while Teng Mo looked at Wu Shi Xian. He stared so openly that the tips of Wu Shi Xian's ears gradually turned red. Finally, unable to endure it any longer, Wu Shi Xian said, "Can you stop staring at me like that? This is the first time I've seen you during the day." Teng Mo continued gazing at him, as though he were some priceless treasure. "It feels like a dream." Wu Shi Xian kept looking out the window and asked as casually as he could, "You've dreamed about me?" Lots of times." Teng Mo answered so sincerely that Wu Shi Xian hesitated. Never mind. It's nothing." Teng Mo asked expectantly, "Can I ask you out again next Saturday?" Wu Shi Xian kept his face expressionless as he looked out the window, though there was the faintest upward curve at the corners of his eyes. "If you want to go ahead." Teng Mo smiled happily. Ever since coming to Jinyang, he had rarely felt this joyful. He almost never went shopping. Most days, he simply looked after his store, played games, and read books. Other than buying inventory, he seldom went out and had very few friends. For the past 5 years, his life had been monotonous and colorless. He had thought he would spend the rest of his life like that. After all, someone as gloomy and insignificant as him didn't deserve a bright, dazzling life. Until Wu Shi Xian appeared. It was as though fresh shoots had finally broken through the barren earth inside his heart. He took Wu Shi Xian to the busiest commercial district in Jinyang. They wandered from one store to another, and every time Teng Mo saw something nice, he wanted to buy it for him. "Go try this on. You'd look great in this varsity jacket. Wait, take this t-shirt too. And these jeans." Arms piled high with clothes, Wu Shi Xian frowned. "I don't want to try them on. Aren't you the one buying clothes? It's not like I need them." Teng Mo sighed dramatically. "These clothes are too youthful. They don't suit me anymore, but they look so good. I never got the chance to wear things like this when I was young. We have similar builds, so just pretend you're wearing them for me. Honestly, what's wrong with young people these days? Can't you indulge an old man's little?" Fine. I'll try them on, okay?" Wu Shi Xian felt a headache coming on from Teng Mo's ridiculous logic. Satisfied, Teng Mo pointed toward the fitting room. "Quick march." Rolling his eyes, Wu Shi Xian walked off with the clothes. A few minutes later, he stepped out wearing the new outfit. Teng Mo's eyes immediately lit up. The red and white varsity jacket paired with sky blue jeans made Wu Shi Xian look fresh, energetic, and effortlessly handsome. Wu Shi Xian frowned instead. Tugging awkwardly at the hem of the jacket, he glanced at himself in the mirror. "I don't like this color. It's too bright. You're so young. Why do you always dress in black? You look like you're headed to a funeral. This color looks great on you. Red, white, and blue is a classic combination. Guys your age should wear brighter colors." Teng Mo talked on enthusiastically, but halfway through, he noticed something strange in Wu Shi Xian's expression. For just an instant, a deep sadness flashed across his face. Thinking he might have imagined it, Teng Mo nevertheless fell silent and asked carefully, "What's wrong? Did I say something I shouldn't have?" Wu Shi Xian lowered his eyes. "No. Should I go pay for it then?" Wu Shi Xian quietly returned to the fitting room to change. Afterward, they wandered through a large department store. Teng Mo shopped decisively. Whenever he liked something, he bought it immediately. Before long, the two of them were carrying a mountain of shopping bags. Wu Shi Xian remained unusually quiet the entire time. Whenever Teng Mo asked him to try on clothes or shoes, he obediently complied. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Yet Teng Mo couldn't shake the feeling that Wu Shi Xian wasn't in a good mood. Then again, Wu Shi Xian wasn't very talkative to begin with. He rarely smiled and always seemed cool and distant. Maybe he was simply overthinking it. Around noon, Teng Mo decided they had bought enough. "I'm hungry. Let's eat something. Do you need the restroom first?" Wu Shi Xian shook his head. "You go? Give me the bags." Looking around, Teng Mo spotted a shoe store nearby. He placed all the shopping bags beside a bench at its entrance. "Leave everything here. Sit and wait for me." Wu Shi Xian nodded obediently and sat down. When Teng Mo returned from the restroom, however, Wu Shi Xian was no longer on the bench. Instead, he was standing quietly at the counter of a jewelry store across from the shoe shop, staring at something inside the display case. Teng Mo walked over quietly behind him and followed his gaze. It was a silver necklace. A delicate chain held a beautifully carved little angel with a pair of sparkling wings. "Do you like it?" Teng Mo asked suddenly. Startled, Wu Shi Xian spun around. "No, I was just bored while waiting." Like a child caught hiding a secret, he hurriedly nudged Teng Mo toward the exit. "Let's go eat." Teng Mo didn't ask any more questions. As they walked away, he glanced back once. That silver necklace. That glittering little angel. It was unmistakably women's jewelry. After lunch, Wu Shi Xian seemed to be in a much better mood, and they continued wandering around. The afternoon sun grew increasingly hot. After only a short walk, Teng Mo pulled Wu Shi Xian over to a bench beneath a large tree to rest. Looking through the shopping bags, Wu Shi Xian realized that Teng Mo had bought only a single shirt for himself. Everything else was for Wu Shi Xian. "Why did you suddenly buy me so many things?" Leaning back comfortably, Teng Mo stretched. "I transfer you so much money, but I never see you buy clothes. You wear the same 2 outfits every day? Even if you don't get tired of them, the people listening to you sing probably do. Doesn't Blue Moon give you a clothing allowance?" Wu Shi Xian raised an eyebrow. "There's no clothing allowance." Grinning, Teng Mo slung an arm around his shoulders. "Then I'll buy your clothes from now on. I might not be rich, but I can definitely afford a few outfits. Our Shi Xian has to be the most dazzling guy on stage." They were sitting on a busy pedestrian street. Wu Shi Xian quickly looked around nervously. "Keep your voice down." The tips of his ears turned pink. Although his eyes were filled with equal parts panic and tenderness, he deliberately put on a stern face. "Aren't you being childish?" Teng Mo burst into laughter. Wu Shi Xian looked just like a shy little mouse, glancing around anxiously. Teng Mo pulled him firmly into an embrace. "How am I childish? My Shi Xian should be the most dazzling person not only at Blue Moon, but in all of Jinyang. No, in all of China." He spoke so loudly that Wu Shi Xian's ears turned scarlet. Yet at the same time, happiness quietly bloomed inside him. The words, "my Shi Xian," sounded almost like a declaration of their relationship. Suppressing the smile tugging at the corners of his lips, he blushed and scolded him. "Will you just shut up? It's so embarrassing." "How is that embarrassing?" Before Teng Mo could continue, Wu Shi Xian hurriedly covered his mouth, afraid he might say something even more outrageous. Teng Mo dodged his hand while laughing. Fine, I'll stop." Huh, what?" Seeing Teng Mo staring behind him, Wu Shi Xian immediately thought, "Nice try. I've seen this trick before. You're trying to distract me." Ignoring his suspicion, Teng Mo held on to Wu Shi Xian's hand and leaned sideways to look past him. "Let me buy you some ice cream." Wu Shi Xian turned around. Behind them stood a handmade ice cream shop with a long line stretching out the door. "I'm not eating any." He hated waiting in lines. "But I want some. Wait here." Without another word, Teng Mo shoved the shopping bags into Wu Shi Xian's arms and ran toward the shop. "Hey!" Wu Shi Xian called after him but couldn't stop him. In the end, he simply sat beneath the tree and waited obediently. More than 20 minutes later, Teng Mo finally emerged carrying 2 enormous ice cream cones. He happily walked back and saw that Wu Shi Xian was indeed still sitting quietly on the bench. But as he approached, his steps slowed. Wu Shi Xian was staring fixedly ahead. What was he looking at? Following his gaze, Teng Mo saw a bridal photography studio across the street. Through its floor-to-ceiling windows, couples were trying on wedding attire. Several magnificent wedding gowns stood on display. One white gown in particular was breathtaking. Layers of delicate tulle shimmered beneath scattered diamonds, glowing in the afternoon sunlight like a dream woven from mist. Wu Shi Xian stared at that dress so intently that he didn't even notice Teng Mo approaching. Only when the melting ice cream was held directly in front of him did he suddenly come back to himself. "I already said I didn't." He looked at Teng Mo in surprise. "Hurry and eat it before it melts." Teng Mo interrupted stubbornly, pushing the cone closer. After a brief hesitation, Wu Shi Xian accepted it. Teng Mo watched him without blinking. Only after Wu Shi Xian took a lick did Teng Mo smile and ask, "Is it cold? Is it sweet?" The cream melted gently on Wu Shi Xian's tongue. Looking up, He saw Teng Mo's face flushed from the heat, beads of sweat glistening beneath the blazing sun. Something inside his own heart quietly melted as well. He nodded obediently. It's sweet. Smiling, Teng Mo sat beside him and began eating his own ice cream. As he ate, he looked again toward the bridal shop across the street. That white wedding dress. It was truly beautiful. Then he turned to the young man beside him. Wu Shi Xian was quietly eating his ice cream with complete concentration. Tall and slender, he resembled a grove of fresh green bamboo, vibrant and full of life. Teng Mo couldn't help imagining how handsome Wu Shi Xian would look wearing a white suit. Wu Shi Xian wasn't gay. He was still so young. One day, he deserved to stand beside the woman he loved and watch her wear a wedding dress for him. Chapter 32. Clearly the doting type. Brother Teng, you're here. The bartender greeted Teng Mo with familiar warmth as soon as he walked in. Teng Mo nodded and took a seat at the bar. The bartender quickly mixed a Long Island iced tea and slid it over. What brings you here today? Xiao Wu isn't on shift. Wu Shi Xian's schedule had become fairly regular. He performed at Blue Moon every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, while other singers took the stage on the remaining days. Since Teng Mo visited so often, the bartenders and servers all knew he was close to Wu Shi Xian and usually only came when Wu was performing. Nothing special today. I just felt like having a drink. Teng Mo smiled, took a sip of the icy cocktail, then asked casually, by the way, does Shi Xian sing anywhere else on the days he's not here? I don't think so. The bartender set down the bottle in his hand and asked casually, hasn't he ever told you? No, Teng Mo paused before adding. He doesn't talk much. Yeah, that's true. The kid's pretty quiet and never really tells us about that sort of thing. But you can ask Xiao Qi later. The bartender pointed toward the drummer on stage. The two of them came here together, so Xiao Qi probably knows more. All right. Teng Mo glanced toward the stage. Tonight's singer was a punk-style girl, dancing enthusiastically as she sang. The drummer and keyboardist, however, were the same ones who usually accompanied Wu Shi Xian. Make yourself comfortable. I need to get back to work. Just call me if you need anything. During the break between songs, the drummer sat at an empty table, drinking water. Taking the opportunity, Teng Mo walked over with his drink. Hey, Xiao Qi. Oh, Brother Teng, what brings you here? The drummer was already fairly familiar with him and looked genuinely surprised. Shi Xian isn't here today. Where did he go? Teng Mo asked, immediately picking up on the remark. Why is he never here on Tuesdays or Thursdays? Is he singing somewhere else these days? No, he's working as a private tutor, the drummer replied earnestly. What? For a moment, Teng Mo thought he had misheard. He tutors 2 high school students in math. The drummer was straightforward and warm-hearted, speaking proudly of Wu Shi Xian's accomplishments as though they were his own. You'd never guess, would you? Even though he always looked so lazy and scruffy on stage, I heard he was actually a top scorer in the college entrance exams. One of those provincial or city-level champions. So, is he studying at a university here in Jinyang? I don't think so. Maybe his family couldn't afford the tuition, so he never went. Right now, he works as a courier and delivers food. Basically, he takes whatever job pays quickly. He works really hard to make money. Teng Mo fell silent. He simply couldn't picture Wu Shi Xian riding around in one of those bright yellow delivery uniforms. Is his family really struggling financially? Is one of his parents sick? I've never heard him mention anything like that, so I don't really know. The drummer shook his head. We met while filling in at another bar. We got along well, so we came to Blue Moon together. He hardly ever talks about his family, and it wouldn't be right for us to pry. That's his private business. Then he lowered his voice mysteriously and motioned for Teng Mo to lean closer. But I think he's so desperate to make money because of his girlfriend. Girlfriend? Teng Mo froze. He has a girlfriend? Yeah. The drummer nodded. She's really pretty. Small, delicate, and very fair. Back when we first started working at Blue Moon, she came here a couple of times and made quite a scene. She really didn't want Shi Xian singing here. The two of them argued and pulled at each other right in the bar. But Shi Xian was incredibly patient with her. You could tell he absolutely doted on her. He paused before continuing. I haven't seen her lately, though. I have a feeling her family is pushing them to get married and pressuring him to buy a house. You know what housing prices are like in Jinyang. Ordinary people can barely afford them. Yeah, exactly. Teng Mo nodded in agreement, though his thoughts were in complete turmoil. If her family's really putting that much pressure on him, well, she is a beautiful girl. Shi Xian probably has no choice but to give it everything he's got. The drummer sighed. Being young these days really isn't easy. Just then, the keyboardist began playing the next intro. The drummer looked up. Oh, I have to get back on stage. Take your time, Brother Teng. Wait. Teng Mo hesitated. About what I asked you today, don't mention it to Shi Xian. The drummer gave him an understanding look. I get it. It's not right to gossip about people behind their backs. Besides, for a guy, not having money is the kind of thing you want to keep to yourself. Yeah. Teng Mo forced a smile and nodded. You should get going. They're waiting for you. After the drummer left, Teng Mo sat there alone for a long time without saying a word. The bar buzzed with life. On stage, the singer poured her heart into the performance while the drums thundered with energy. Below, people laughed, toasted, and chatted happily. Only Teng Mo sat alone, as though all the noise in the world had nothing to do with him. At his age, he understood that the safest relationships were always the shallow ones. Whether they revolved around money or sex, they could end cleanly without leaving much pain behind. But the moment you tried to get close to someone's heart, tears became inevitable. The more you understood someone, the deeper your attachment grew. That was why he had never asked about Wu Shi Xian's private life before. By keeping his distance, he protected Wu Shi Xian from unnecessary intrusion and protected himself from getting hurt. Yet he couldn't forget the expression in Wu Shi Xian's eyes when he had looked at that wedding dress last Saturday. In the end, he simply couldn't stop himself from asking. And sure enough, it was exactly what he had feared. Was it still not too late to walk away?